Okay, Chair, we're live.
Thank you. Good morning, Borada, everyone. Welcome to the Powys County Council Governance and Audit Committee for the 9th of February 2023. The first agenda item is apologies, and we have no formal apologies. Can I move us to agenda item 2, please? Any disclosures of interest in connection with the agenda for this meeting, please? I'll assume silence means there are none, so we will move on. Item 3 is the decision tracker. I've got a couple of points, but I would prefer to open to the floor first. Councillor Pete, please, you've got a question on the decision tracker.
Yeah, no, it's just a point of information. Thank you, Chair. It was, unless I've missed it, where's the minutes from our last meeting?
We haven't had them, Councillor Pete.
Ah, okay.
We haven't. When can you give us an update on when we'll have the minutes, please?
I'm working on them currently, Chair. Sorry, there's been a slight delay because of other things going on at the moment with budgets, for example.
Yeah, so when I get the draft, I'll try to turn it around as quickly as I can, and it will be included in the March meeting pack. Yeah.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay. Any other points on the decision tracker or questions, John? John, you're still on mute.
My apologies. It says that the review of the debt policy is to be added to the forward work programme. It is not on the work programme as we're going to look at it later on. I think it really needs to come on fairly quickly. I don't know what your view is, Chair.
Yeah, I would agree. Thanks, John, for raising that. Yeah, thank you. Could I just ask for an update on where we are with the working groups? I know I've got one meeting in my diary, but I just wanted an update if all of the working groups had first meetings.
Okay, they've all been set up by the internal audit one, which I'm still discussing with Ian about dates.
Okay, right, okay. So
and
I think
on the debt policy, Chair, as we've got another meeting now in March, if we can do it and Jane's acceptable with that, can we put it on that meeting?
Yes, yeah. It looks, and we'll come to that later on the agenda, but it looks as though that formal meeting will be towards the second half of March. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I haven't seen sight of the format of those working groups. I'm not sure whether anybody else on this panel has, and I would appreciate if they could be sent.
So we've agreed as a committee. We signed off the terms of reference, and when subsequently added to those terms of reference, the lead officer for each of the working groups and the lead officer's contact details. So if you could please recirculate those terms of reference and lead with the details of the lead officers, and those terms of reference also included which of the committee members had volunteered to contribute to those working groups. So we'll recirculate that information to remind everyone. And then I had asked Wynne to try to get the first meeting of each working group to happen in the first quarter of the calendar year. And what we are hoping, and this is in the terms of reference, is that during the first meeting of the working group, that the working group will nominate its own chair, someone just to sort of hold the ring on discussions, and then have a discussion on the terms of reference with the lead officer and establish how they want to prioritise the work going forward. And we also agreed that each working group would give a regular feedback report on its activity to the full committee. And what I'd like to see, I guess Wynne and I could come up with something together, is a kind of standard format for that reporting, so that, you know, a one-page highlight report in a similar format, so that every committee reports in the same format, so that it's really easily accessible for us all to keep abreast of what each of the committees is doing.
Okay.
So that's kind of where we are, but that's a bit what we're hoping for, as well as where we are, Councillor Graham.
Yeah, okay, just be very useful for us all to have access to that, I think.
Absolutely, I completely agree. So when can we make that an action for today, tomorrow, please, to recirculate all the terms of reference, etc.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Graham. Ian, I was wondering if you could just briefly comment on the two actions that are there for you, the one on corporate fraud and the one on assurance mapping.
Thank you, Chair. I will. In terms of the corporate fraud, we've been undertaking a fraud risk assessment. We did stage one of that and delivered that to the council, but we've now undertaken stage two, which has mopped up all of the original departments that didn't respond, and that action's now being completed and sent to the client. So maybe the fraud risk assessment is something the council could consider in the future, or the committee could consider in the future.
Thank you.
On the assurance mapping, I think that's a bigger project. We are transitioning to a new piece of software that will allow us to do that. But I think probably the timescale of that is more likely to be 3 to 6 months before we get a really good visual assurance map that can work, I would say.
Thank you, but it's good to, I mean, it's good to know that it's on your desk and that SWAP are thinking about how we could have a kind of really clear, easily understandable map of assurance within the authority. I mean, I'd hope, Ian, that you would be working with senior officers on that exercise, because ultimately an assurance map, it needs to be owned by the senior team and rather than SWAP, but you have the expertise to support us to develop that.
Absolutely, Chair. If I can add to that, you know, the fraud risk assessment and the assurance map, it will be the responsibility of the council, but I think we are in a unique position to help drive and start that. And an assurance map should be live, and there should be feedback from all parts of the council into that map. So I'm more than willing to, you know, look at spending time, you know, implementing that map and starting the discussion, certainly, and I shall report back on how that goes in the future.
Thank you very much, Ian. Much appreciated. Councillor Graham, your hand's still up. Is that a legacy hand, or do you have a further question, please?
Legacy hand, sorry, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Graham. Gareth, please.
Sorry. You, Gareth, Councillor.
Apologies, I put my hand up before, but I've taken it down now, so it wasn't me. So it's the other Gareth.
I was wondering, Councillor Gareth, because I knew your hand was up, but then it was down. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah. Maybe I've missed it, but we had that. We had the meeting where we had the presentation, very informative presentation about the Global Centre of Rail Excellence. And I know I raised an action coming out of that.
That might have been missed because that was an informal meeting, or I'm not sure.
No, I think it was included, Chair. It's an item to do with oh, bear with me if I can find it. It's back in the 2022 one.
It was December we had that meeting.
Yeah.
Yes. Let's have a look. Last November. There certainly was one. I remember Gareth mentioning we need to bring forward a document
Yeah, it's in complex cases where the council's involved. It wears a number of hats, statutory, non-statutory, and there's different rates of risk associated with each responsibility, and to see if there could be any conflicts of interest when these multiple roles are being pursued.
Right, okay, let's not dwell on that right now, but please, when could we have an action clearly articulated in the terms that,
Yes.
that Gareth has asked for?
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gareth, for raising that. Are there any other comments or questions in connection with the decision tracker? I'm going to assume not. Okay, let's move on to the strategic risk item. So we have two items to consider under this item. First is the Strategic Risk Register Q2 report, and the second is the risk appetite paper. So we are asked to receive and consider the Q2 report of the risk register, and then we will be asked to receive and consider the report that has been to Cabinet on risk appetite. So Bets, are you leading this item for us?
I can, but I wasn't sure whether I was going to do the second one, risk appetite, and Councillor David was going to do the first one, but I'm happy to if Councillor David
Okay,
does.
Councillor David, how do you want to play this?
I'm happy for Bets to do both of them, Chair.
Thanks very much. And in presenting Bets, I think please assume that all members have read the paper, and call out any key points that you wish to call out and what you specifically want the committee to respond to and consider. So over to you, and then I'll open the floor for questions.
Okay, I'm just moving up to the first report. Okay, oh sorry, my camera's off. Okay, good morning, everyone. So it's to look at the Q3 Strategic Risk Register report. So as always, it's to seek assurance on the effectiveness of the arrangements in place by the Council to manage risk. And this report is to fulfil your role by considering the report that's going to be submitted to Cabinet on the 7th of March. The key points are that following on from SLT's focus session on the Strategic Risk Register back in July, all current and potential strategic risk as well as global risks were discussed, and further detailed work has continued. A dedicated session on climate and nature emergency was postponed and written in the report rescheduled for February. We can actually confirm that that took place yesterday. And Cabinet have since received risk management training and also be given access to the relevant service risk registers to their portfolio holders on JCAD. Moving on to the main report. So if I'm assuming that everyone has read it, quickly flicking through, there are 15 risks on the Strategic Risk Register, and all risk owners have provided a short summary of progress to give assurance. You'll see on Appendix B that there's we visualize the risks in a heat map, and you can see there that 7 out of the 15 risks have a probability of likely and an impact of major. During this quarter, we would like to escalate the following risk, which is related to financial services. I'm not going to go through that now, and you'll note under that we have noted that examples of past fraud have been provided to Cabinet separately to aid their understanding of the current residual score setting, which I believe has already been to yourselves in Audit and Governance Committee, and Jane might come in on that later. But the figure to note is the 989K. However, you've, like I say, you've already received that report, so that should help with your understanding of why you'd like to escalate that risk. Property planning and public protection would like to escalate another risk, which is all to do with planned power outages. Again, the detail is in the report in front of you, as well as the mitigation. Then we would like to request Cabinet to formally de-escalate 2 more risks, which relate to children and education, children's services and education. Both of these risks are related to management of budget, and the reason is that both risks are currently covered by FN 001. The Council is unable to deliver a financially sustainable budget over the short and medium term. Both these risks will continue to be managed on the service's own risk registers, so they're not being closed, they're just being, the proposal is to de-escalate. And any individual service budget related risk will be integrated into the FN 001. However, should an individual service risk score elevate to catastrophic, it will be considered for escalation to the strategic risk register separately. Then finally, as per our risk management framework, any risk that is scored 15 or above must be considered for escalation by SLT. And we have 1 risk that falls into that category, which relates to adult and children's services, is if there is insufficient capacity to respond to a longer term demand in children and adult services in a timely manner. And again, I won't go into all the mitigation, as you said. So that is the bulk of the main report. Resource implications, there are no direct resource implications. Comments have been provided from legal and section 151 officer, and we finish with the recommendation, which is to recommend that Cabinet notes that the current strategic risk register and is satisfied with progress against mitigating actions for Q3, approves the escalation of the 3 risks that I've already mentioned, and approves the de-escalation of the other 2 risks that I've mentioned.
Thank you very much, Bets. And again, I think we said last meeting, but the risk register is looking really good. So thank you for your work, and anyone else in the authority who's supporting this risk work. So colleagues, we are asked to seek assurance on the effectiveness of the arrangements in place in the Council to manage risk. So in light of that request, do colleagues have any questions or observations to make of the current risk register, and in particular the escalations and de-escalations? Councillor Peat, I can see you want to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was around the de-escalation of the risk for me, actually. So I thought the de-escalation, as it was written there, seemed to me more about presentation rather than any reduction in the risk. And as we all know, schools is a main area of concern in the budget. So I suppose it was just trying to seek some comment or assurance that by incorporating these now under one more generic heading, we don't lose sight of the detail and importance of these risks. So I think for me, I would be leaning more towards leaving them as separate risks in the register and not de-escalating them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Councillor Peat, for those thoughts. Before I bring Jane in, I'll share with colleagues that my thinking was in the very same space as Councillor Peat's. I had some concerns about the de-escalation and questions around the accountability of senior officers in the particular service, and any risk that the risks would not be managed and have sufficient attention if they were bundled in with a broader corporate risk. So I sense that I know exactly where you're coming from, Councillor Peat, so thanks very much for your question. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, these were considered. I mean, when you've got an overall risk for the financial sustainability of the council, that is something clearly considered at a corporate level. And that consideration encompasses the whole of the budget. It encompasses all of our longer term strategy as well. And both of these areas, as with any other service areas, are clearly a part on that, particularly with schools being such a major part of our council budget. So clearly those things are considered at a corporate level. Therefore, we felt there was duplication with having separate service risks around this, because you could argue every service would potentially want a risk. So we felt we could adequately manage it within that overarching risk. And I think that's important, particularly when we see how we develop the budget. It is very much a corporate responsibility through SLT, through heads of service, feeding through then into cabinet with directors and EMT, and part of that development with cabinet, which makes sure that we do consider all services across the council in that overarching one risk. So we felt there was duplication. This streamlined it, but we haven't lost sight of the impact of any budgetary decisions across all services.
Thanks, Jane. Any further thoughts or comments around this, please? Councillor William, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to move, if possible, to page 43, Strategic Risk Register, where it relates to the Ukraine issue. There's a reference to the Ukraine cell continuing to meet, and then as I scroll across, there's a reference to the status withdrawn. I just wanted to have clarity as to what the term withdrawn means in that context, because obviously we're all painfully aware of the current sort of rearmament that is underway there, obviously well beyond any of our control, and the threat of a spring offensive by the Russian forces as well, potentially leading to a fresh wave of people seeking refuge, as well as the more global issues. I don't understand the reference there to withdrawn. If you could just give me an update as to what that actually means in practice.
Thanks for your question, Councillor William. I'll go to Bets for an answer to that, please.
Thank you.
Yes. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay. I'm scrolling down to the risk itself at the moment in the paper, but I straight away can answer when it says withdrawn.
Yeah.
That relates to one of the mitigation actions.
Okay.
So related to the risk itself, it's related to one of the controls that we've got in place. So one of those controls that was what previously was in place has now been withdrawn, but it does not mean the risk itself has been withdrawn.
Okay, yes, it's along the one I was referring to. It refers to Ukraine cell set up to report on gold, on consequences, and to manage. So okay, so that's just I was over imagining what that implied. Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Jane, do you want to come in on this point before I bring in Gareth Hall?
Yeah, yes, please. I think just for some clarity, we set that cell up in response to the emerging issues around Ukraine.
About 12 months ago.
Yeah, the cell was set up to try and establish what those impacts were relation to supply chain, increasing costs, and everything that we've seen happen over the last 12 months. So there was a need for that cell initially to focus on that. We now understand and are dealing with those issues routinely. So what we have done is we've changed the sort of overarching remit of that cell to be much broader, but we haven't lost sight of the issues that were raised. But as I said, they've been embedded in business as usual.
So it's kind of mainstreamed across our different service areas. Thank you for that explanation.
Thanks very much for the question. Gareth, I'll bring you in now, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I endorse very much what you said earlier about the detail of the risk register. My comment relates to the column in control or actions. There's a lot of them that are in progress. Some of them are quite aspirational, like just taking one, for example, in the risk about recruitment, about improving educational attainment of all pupils. Well, that will be something that will be ongoing, but other actions are one-offs. So I'm just wondering about the timeline of this progress and when results will be achieved, and if it is an ongoing process, which direction is it going in? And the other thing is, of all these very detailed actions, which are the ones which would have a major impact on reducing the risk? Could there be some sort of ranking and some indication of which direction, or traffic lights or arrows of are the mitigation measures working?
Thanks, Gareth. All very, very good points. Any thoughts on this, please? I mean, and as a general rule, I don't like in progress. I like to see deadlines and fixed points. But Bets, if you could help us understand.
Yeah, I'm busy scribbling notes at the same time too. Yes, of course. I actually had a meeting 2 days ago with JCAD, the company that that facilitate, own this piece of software. Unfortunately, I was stood up, so I can't think, and it's sorry. So that's been rearranged. But the main purpose of that meeting was to try and understand if we could set targets for the mitigation, for the controls and actions. So hopefully, when I meet with JCAD for the rearranged meeting, I will have a better answer for you next time. But that is something we are looking into to see if we can put target dates for the mitigating actions. Of course, in relation to the other points, I would have to add, if in relation to is the mitigation going in the right way, that's part of the whole risk management process. And that would be something that is part of the discussions that we have at SLT Cabinet with yourselves to see if we feel that mitigation is working to reduce the risk down. What you don't see in this report, which is available on JCAD and Cabinet members now have access to with their in relation to the services that are relevant to them, is they can now go into JCAD and they can see the progress against each of those controls. It's not on this report. It is possibly something that we could add to the report, but bear in mind it would make it a lot bigger, because you'd be having all of the reviews and summaries against each of the mitigating actions as well. But that information is available, and it is something that goes through SLT and the regular meetings with portfolio holders, etc., where they can look at that detail as to what the progress is against each mitigating action.
Thank you, Bets. Gareth, does that go some way to?
Yes, yeah. And we'll wait to hear back from Bets of the progress in the meeting with that company. Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'll bring in Councillor Graham, and then I'll bring in Councillor Chris after Councillor Graham. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to go back to the risk around schools, if I may. I am concerned at the level of risk that's been identified here, particularly in secondary schools, and I'm concerned at the wording on there, which suggests that high schools in particular are winning the battle against their deficits in the way it's worded. I've sat in several meetings in the last week where councillors who are governors at high schools, and I am one myself, and they have not been sharing the views that are expressed in this risk issue here. I think it's fair to say that the Cabinet recognises the seriousness of the situation, because they have put forward a proposal this week to add another £500,000 for schools, which will barely scratch the surface when you consider how many schools we have. Clearly the majority are not in a deficit position, but I would suggest that nearly all high schools are heading towards very, very serious deficit situations. as has been confirmed by numerous governors during scrutiny meetings and group meetings for the last week. So I'm a little surprised at the level of risk that's identified here, and I would like to see us relook at that, whether it's in one of our working groups or whether the team will take this back and look at the real risk, because I think the risk is much higher than we're seeing.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. I'll bring Jane in to respond, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, school budgets are something that we are all concerned about, particularly the level of deficit that we have seen historically in some of those secondary schools. A key consideration when Cabinet are setting and proposing a budget to Council, and I know that those specific issues that you've raised there have had quite a considerable debate as part of the scrutiny sessions as well, and we do have a schools forum meeting this afternoon as well, where no doubt some of those things will be being raised there. I think it's important to note that in terms of some of those deficits, the work that we're undertaking with individual schools will look to help those schools resolve some of those issues. We did, as I said, some of the deficits are historical. We were able to stabilise budgets over the last couple of years, particularly with changes to the formula and so on. But again, working with those schools to try and reduce the costs where appropriate, to help those manage those deficits. The impact of the cost of living and the impact of inflation that we're all seeing at the moment inevitably is going to impact on our schools, as it is all services across the council. And in terms of the proposal, obviously we've been able to passport all of the funding that we received, additional funding from Welsh Government this year in our settlement to schools, and that has been passported across. But schools, like other services, are having to manage some of those pressures themselves. But as you rightly say, you know, thinking that through with the addition now of the £500,000 fund that's been proposed will help us to do that, but something we will keenly work with schools to make sure that we can manage those deficits and not see them increasing considerably over this year and into next.
Thanks, Jane. And Councillor Graham, I agree this is something that the committee should come back to and seek further assurance on, whether it's a risk deep dive or through a working group. I think we can consider that. But when, please, could you include an action that the committee would want to come back to consideration of schools budgets as a risk? Councillor Chris, please. You're still on mute, Councillor Chris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
There we are. I thought it had frozen there. Mine is, I'm looking at the page 25 of the Strategic Risk Register, looking at the information system that they're saying is not fit for purpose, or potentially not fit for purpose. One is mnemonics are great if you know what they mean, but when you're looking at this as a fresh, you've then got to go back and find out what it actually means. And I just wondered whether that could be detailed in of what it actually clarifies, because it just doesn't necessarily mean things if you read it cold. That's one observation. The other one on this is I'm just a little bit surprised the rating in relation to this, particularly as on 6.1 of our agenda, we've got a corporate safeguarding audit report, which gives a number of major considerations for this committee to look at. It also says, as a part of the risk identified, that we wouldn't be able to fulfill part of our statutory and operational duties. And yet we've got this as a low rating. The other thing that picks up on here is under the Q3 report, is that a review is now considering the options for a data management system. Yet in Q1, there had been an option appraisal and things were getting progress forward. In this report, there's nothing really telling you of whether progress has been made, and it echoes on some of the points that Gareth made previously about it just feeling like it's standstill and given as little as possible rather than greater detail on it. And to me, I don't get a sense of urgency. And when we've looked at the report on corporate safeguarding, that gives me some major causes for concern. So I don't get the feel from this, and this is a central plank as I'm reading it within this on the. And another question, just briefly, Chair, is has this been budgeted in for this new data management system, or is that going to be an additional expenditure going into the next financial year that is not yet being picked up? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chris, for your questions, really important questions. So I'll do the more straightforward answer. WCCIS stands for Welsh Community Care Information System. And I will pass over to Jane to answer the more difficult questions. Or Nina, Nina, are you going to come in?
Good morning, thank you, Chair. I'm Nina Davis, the Interim Director of Social Services and Housing for Powys County Council. Thank you, Councillor Chris. Take on board your comments about the acronyms and use of, and we'll take that away, something to consider absolutely moving forward. I appreciate sometimes that the language may not be the easiest, so I take that on board, thank you. In terms of WCCIS, the stability and performance of that system has improved over recent times, and the kind of so we keep under regular review, and we have done again recently in the last couple of weeks, the rating levels for this risk. So they are under regular review across services, supported by Bets as well, with her knowledge and support as well, which is very much appreciated. I would just note here that, you know, the item we've got later on the agenda today is about corporate safeguarding review, which is something quite different when we get to it. So it hasn't, you know, the Wales audit report hasn't looked at educational, social services, etc. It's over the overarching corporate approach to safeguarding, which is quite different. I think the one of the last points you asked then was about work to looking at what we're doing with regards to this system. That work is absolutely very much ongoing and is a priority. And we, you know, thank you to our corporate colleagues that resource has been prioritised to look at the digital work needed and required across social services at the moment. So we're very appreciative of that. That work is progressing swiftly, and we'll have some recommendations coming forward very soon. So just wanted to give you the assurance of the corporate priority that is being given to that work. I don't want to prejudge what the outcome of that work will be, but you know, as you say, the budget and implications of that will have to be looked at in due course once we've received the outcomes of that piece of work. But just to assure you, the work is ongoing and it is a priority. And thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chris. Does that answer your questions for now, or is there anything you'd like to come back on?
Yes, it does. And I mean, I do appreciate the mnemonics are an easy way to put into a thing on there, but they don't always, people don't necessarily realize them, and then you have to look them up. I am familiar with this under my background is in health, so on the, it's just an observation. It was always a bugbear all the way through, so I just think it's just helpful to put it in on that. But thank you for the update. I appreciate that.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor Chris. Jane, do you want to add anything? Or I can see Councillor David wants to come in. Councillor David.
It was on a previous point, Chair, if I may.
Yes, of course.
With regards to school budgets, just a high level point that I think we need to bear in mind that the settlement from Welsh Government, whereas it was better than expected, it was still well below the rate of inflation. So all services have been impacted with regard to the amount of funding that they received. With regards to schools, it's important to emphasise that every single extra penny that was awarded for education was passported over to the school's budget. And on top of that, we have identified that we've got these severe pressures with regard to energy costs, and we have set up £500,000 in contingency funding for that. But that said, if you do have a deep dive into schools deficits, it's worth looking at, with regard to secondary schools in particular, some of the historic deficits there, because I'd agree there are problems, and these have been identified over many years. And with regard to that deep dive, obviously any suggestions that the Audit and Governance Committee can make with regard to extra funding for schools would be welcomed by Cabinet, because as it stands, even by putting that extra £500,000 into the schools' budgets this year, we've had to reduce funding in other services, and that does increase further pressures on some services that are really desperate to have money as well. So it's just worth bearing that in mind. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Councillor David. Your points are well made, and prioritisation in all public services at this time is extremely challenging, very, very, very challenging. So I do appreciate your comments. Thank you. I can see that John Brottingham would like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Just unmuting. Yeah, I totally understand what Councillor David said just then, and I sympathise very much with the position he finds himself. Just taking it all in all, though, Chair, I do find myself wanting to very much endorse your feelings about keeping these risks separate and not combining them. I think we might be just sort of losing sight of them a little if we're not very, very careful. Mm-hmm. My main question, though, was to go back to the escalation risks. There are two there that are being escalated. The first one was related to fraud. And my question was, what evidence have we got that, other than anecdotal, that the fraud situation is likely to get worse? And secondly, when we're talking about the power outages or the possibility of power outages, as I understand it, the rollout of power cuts is only going to be likely in an absolutely worst case scenario. And really, do we really believe that it's both of these risks deserve a residual score of 12, which is the reason we're looking at them?
Jane, can you come in to address John's points, please?
Yeah, I can pick up probably more specifically on the fraud one that you've questioned. I think we are seeing increased levels of fraud, not us personally, but nationally. We're seeing increased levels of fraud through a number of areas. And we're just recognising that there is that potential. I think it's fair to say that the scoring's been challenged at SLT and EMT. We felt too, it very much as you were stating there, John, that that score seems very high when we're not seeing evidence that it's happening to us at that level. So yes, we are mindful of the scoring there, and it's been asked to be reviewed by officers sort of on the ground there to look at that. But it is taking into consideration some of the values that you've seen through this committee in the past when we've reported around fraud, where we're looking at potential recovery of about £1 million being stopped through the work of that fraud team. So when you consider it at that level of financial impact, and that may not be directly on the council, that's in terms of benefits fraud, housing benefit fraud, all of those things that we see, that I think it's just there's a heightened risk now due to the pressure that many people are seeing themselves under. In terms of the outage, power outage, yes, I think we're all hoping that that is something that's not likely to happen. But of course, if it does, it could have a major impact. So as you would expect, we have to think about that impact. We have to have a response to it should it happen. And that's why it's being scored at the levels that we see there. But hopefully it's not something that we will see.
Do we have contingency plans? I mean, do we have backup generators? Do we have batteries backup?
We do in some buildings. County Hall has a backup system. Other key properties, you know, not so much for ourselves, but hospitals, things like that, all do. But it's something that we consider in terms of we might need to move things around. We might need to get specific people together in those buildings because we can't bring everybody into those buildings. So having a plan that looks to prioritise what we would do is important in case it does happen.
Thank you, Jane. I want Ian, is your hand up to help answer that question?
It is, Chair. Just if I can just.
In which case, Councillor William, I'll bring Ian in before I bring you in. Thank you, Councillor William. Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Just to talk about obviously the risk of fraud, and it's been identified in this report. I think the risk register is generally a very much of the moment thing, and this risk around fraud is probably one of the few on there that is horizon scanning and looks into the future. And so that's why it's really important that we at least recognise that. It's probably on the up, and we need to recognise that risk is increasing. So I just wanted to make that comment that it's horizon scanning and looking towards the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ian. John, have Ian and Jane's responses addressed your points?
I suppose there's no harm in having them on the risk register, other than that, you know, it just confuses other things. But yeah, by all means, let's have them on, but keep them under review, because I think particularly the power outages one could well be de-escalated at the next meeting.
Thanks, John. Thank you very much, and thanks, Jane and Ian. Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair. Just taking a slightly different tack on the second of the two risk areas that John has raised and to which Ian responded, the one around power outages. I just wanted to check whether the current insufficiencies and inadequacy of grid infrastructure is reflected elsewhere or is linked to this particular risk, because I was just yesterday speaking to a cabinet member about a particular potential renewable energy scheme on one of our larger roof expanses in the southeast of Powys, on a Powys owned building, and he flagged something I was already fairly aware of, which is how inadequate the grid currently is and the pinch points which actually bear down on the ability to generate our own electricity and hopefully therefore to make the outages that this risk relates to less likely and to make ourselves more resilient. Is that picked up elsewhere within our risk register? Because clearly it's something that we aren't in a position to move forward in our own right, because you're talking about bigger ticket items and bigger players. But it does seem in the longer term for a green resilient Powys, something that is very much a necessity and something that we need to use whatever influence we can to push for and to make happen, particularly in the context maybe of some of the funding that is available at a Westminster level if it were to flow to us.
Thank you, Councillor William, for your question. Jane, your hand's up. Can you address this?
Just to quickly respond, you don't necessarily see those items feature in the risk register, and I don't think it's appropriate for some of those to be in the risk register as mitigating action, but clearly those are considerations that we're looking at in other areas of the council. So they don't feature here specifically, but we are obviously considering that as your conversation shows.
Okay, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks. Ian, is your hand up there as a legacy hand? Yeah, thanks.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions for officers or any further observations on the risk register? Before we move on from this item, I think I want to thank colleagues. I think we've had an extremely thorough conversation about the strategic risks. Picking up Councillor Peate's point and John Brottingham's point and my own observations about the de-escalation, the two de-escalations of children and adult services and the school's budget. I just wanted to test the committee's sense of the importance of this de-escalation discussion and our concern over sightedness and accountability of those risks, and ask the committee if it feels strongly enough about this that we could write to Cabinet to reflect our discussions on the de-escalation and ask Cabinet to be particularly mindful around the sightedness and accountability around these two risks if they are conflated into the broader corporate financial risk. I just wanted to test the committee's thinking on that and perhaps consider writing to Cabinet. Councillor Peate.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I would thoroughly agree and support what you've just said there, Chair. I think it does need to be brought to Cabinet's attention, and I am, as you and others are, seriously concerned about losing sight of this very important risk. So I would fully support what you're suggesting.
Thank you, Councillor Peate. Councillor Gareth, did you want to come in? I saw your hand up and it's gone. So I'll bring in Councillor Graham, but mindful that Councillor Gareth had his hand up.
Yeah, simply, Chair, to support what you've said. I think that's absolutely the right tack to take. Councillor David is present, obviously, and has heard our thoughts, so I'm sure he will take those on board as well. I'd be more than happy to support what you're saying.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. I've got John and then I've got Councillor Ange.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I thoroughly support what you said, and I would like to move that we write such a letter, please.
Thank you, John. Thank you for moving that. I'll just bring in Councillor Ange.
Yeah, I'd like to second what John has said, really. I think, as you say, David is here and he will be listening and take that back. But I think if we can push that forward, that would not be a bad thing at all.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much, Councillor Ange. Councillor Gareth, I can see you now.
Yeah, apologies. No, sorry. Yeah, no, fully supportive of us taking this back and asking the question, Cabinet. But one question, just for me, and I'm apologies if it's in there and I've missed it. How quickly do we escalate stuff into this position? Because I think that's another question we need to understand, that if something happens, how do things get onto these registers? You know, at what point do we actually say, oh, hang on, we need some extra support and we need some scrutiny on this?
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Gareth. When I would like to, before I bring in the team to answer Councillor Gareth's point about how it works, I would like to deal with John's moving. John, did you move? Yeah, you moved and Councillor Ange seconded. I
did indeed.
So when I think we could move to a show of hands for support of a note to go to Cabinet, please. Thank you. I need to find my hand. Okay. So I think we have, yeah, thank you very much, Councillor William. Okay, so that is a decision by the committee that we will write to Cabinet to ask them to consider the accountability and sightedness around de-escalating those risks. When, how would the drafting of that be organised? Is that something that you and I would do together?
Yes, Chair, we could do that either as a letter to the Cabinet, or
Right.
we could do it as a sort of recommendations report, but we can discuss
Okay,
that afterwards.
right, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for that discussion. Just before we finish this item, oh, Councillor David.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, the note you send into Cabinet, is that specifically about the 2 de-escalation proposals in this report and not the process overall?
Yes, Councillor David, it's specifically about those 2 de-escalations.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor David. Beth, could you just answer Councillor Gareth's points about how? Yeah.
Yes, of course. The process is, as you know, as you've shown or depicted in the risk management framework, is that the services themselves can choose to escalate request to escalate a risk. Also, there is myself, when I go around individual services, SLTs, doing the regular horizon scanning, as Ian mentioned, etc., etc. And one of those things as well is there anything in particular they'd like to escalate, as well as transformation risks, as well, asking them, is there anything they would like to escalate? So that's one part of the process. Then what happens is that is then put in this paper, which goes to Cabinet as a proposal, not as a given, but a proposal to escalate. SLT will consider, EMT will consider, and then it goes through the process of going forward through to informal Cabinet, the paper coming to you guys, and then going to formal Cabinet as their final decision. However, there have been occasions where a risk cannot wait the quarterly timeframe. So therefore, in those circumstances, like we had just previously, EMT sign it off and escalate it up onto the strategic risk register in the meantime. I hope that answers your question. I think that is everything. Is there anything you want to add, Jane?
No, it's fine.
Councillor Gareth, is that sufficient?
Yeah, thank you. It's just a bit of understanding of the process is good for us all to know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your question. I am going to move us on, if everyone's happy, to the risk appetite paper, which has already been to Cabinet, and we are receiving it essentially for information and assurance. Bets, Jane, is anyone going to speak to the paper, or will we take it as read that colleagues have all read the paper?
I was going to go through it. I can do it quicker if you would prefer, Chair.
Yeah, I think, Bets, we need to assume that everyone has read the paper and focus on key points and what you want from the committee, please.
Okay, so I was going to say, like, apologies, it's quite a technical report, but it's important that we do go through it. So if I just zoom through, it's important to say that the risk appetite included in this report supersedes the Council's pre-existing one, dated July 2019. It's that risk is not undesirable, but risk, if avoided completely, then the organisations limit their chances of fully achieving objectives. I'd also like to say that, sorry, I'm scrolling through, but want to say, I'm trying to see, is that, it's in the report somewhere, but basically that it is a fluid thing, and so therefore we want risk management, the risk appetite will be regularly reviewed by Cabinet to make sure that we're taking into account the current situations. And then if I move on to the actual risk appetite report itself, just want to highlight that section 3, which covers the governance of risk appetite. Also, what I've just kind of alluded to, it's a live document that will be regularly reviewed and modified by EMT and approved by Cabinet. It's important to note that under section 4, we do say that although we have a risk appetite for programmes and project delivery, each programme or project should consider a further detailed approach if necessary at that level. and again reviewed regularly. And then we move on to section 5, which is all about the risk appetite. The council always aims to operate organisational activities at the levels defined below. Where activities are projected to exceed defined levels, this must be highlighted throughout the appropriate governance mechanisms. So again, I think it's important to say that, you know, where we say unacceptable, the level of risk is completely unacceptable and not tolerated, there is more information in that commentary that's important to consider with the title of unacceptable. And even when a risk does possibly land into the range, you know, we're still saying that that mitigation should be implemented immediately to either prevent the risk from becoming an issue or detect the issue and ensure that it's been addressed. So there's a lot more detail in that report, and on the assurance that you've all read it, then I won't go through all of the other detail, but if you please, you know, if you haven't had a chance to read it, please do. My only other one comment is I do now think perhaps in hindsight it might be better taking off the colours that are on the table in 5.2, as I think that can be a little bit confusing, and actually add in the range. So unacceptable is unacceptable. Green, low would be a score of 1 to 6. Moderate be a score of 8 to 12, and high be a score of 15 to 25, which links in with the risk management framework if you scroll down, which is right at the bottom. So I think that's the main points, Chair.
Thank you very much, Bets. And I mean, as an opener, I found it an incredibly helpful document. Using slightly different language from some other risk appetite frameworks that I've seen before, but you know, very similar, and it gave me a level of confidence. So thank you very much. Jane, I can see that you want to come in.
Only a couple of things, Chair, but I think the important paragraph in the overarching report is 2.4, and this is saying by defining that risk appetite across the council, we can more effectively prioritise the risks and the mitigation and the allocation of resources, and all of that comes into play, and it gives a level of consistency to services as well when they're considering risks at an individual level. Although you have the scoring matrix, you know, knowing what the council's appetite is around some of those risks really helps us look at it in a more consistent way. So I just wanted to point that out, really.
Thank you very much, Jane. Open the floor for any questions or comments on the risk appetite paper. If there are no points of detail or comments, I would just echo Bets's closing remarks that if you haven't had a chance to read it in detail, I would encourage you to do so. So from my perspective, what I would really like assurance on from senior officers is that the document is, how is the document used? How is the risk appetite document used? Is it a live document? So assurance really that it's a live document and it's not one of these documents that is put on a shelf once it's been prepared and approved of. So that's the kind of assurance that I think I would like to seek. So Jane, if you could address that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a live document. We will review it. I'm not sure we've got a date in here for when. I think we review it annually at least. So we will do that and make sure that that's worked into our overall work programme. I think in terms of how it's used, then it will very much be part of the risk management framework. So it'll be a key document as part of that pack of documents or the toolkit there, so that services refer to this when they first identify new risks or even when they're just reviewing their own risks. So it is definitely part of that overall framework and will feature within that.
Thank you very much for that assurance, Jane. It's much appreciated. Unless there are any final points on risk, I would, thank. Oh, John, sorry, I can see you want to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very quickly. I hear what Jane said about annual review. I totally agree with an annual review. I do think, though, it might be better in the early part of the annual cycle rather than have it at the end, so that we've got continuity of the individuals who are actually doing these the reviews themselves.
Thanks, John. That's a fair point. So I'll close the risk agenda item 4, and I will close it by thanking Bets very much for all of her hard work and her endeavours. Committee really appreciates the work and the quality of what we receive. So thank you very much, Bets. I'll move us on to item 5. Item 5, we have the quarterly internal audit update report, and we have 2 limited assurance internal audit reports to consider, one on continuing healthcare and one on deprivation of liberty safeguards. So I'll pass on to Ian. Ian, if we could take each item one by one, but just sort of looking at the clock, I don't want to hurry this item at all because it's really, really important, but perhaps we, the balance of time should be on the 2 limited assurance reports. But, you know, obviously we want to hear your overview position as well and have the opportunity to ask questions on that, Ian. So Ian, if you could briefly introduce your quarterly report, and then we'll take questions from the committee.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief on this because it's generally it's good news for the authority. It's on page 67 of the big pack of the agenda pack. It's at the end of Q3, so it's up till December. In terms of the headlines, in terms of the plans that we deliver, you'll see there that we are indicating that coverage is acceptable in terms of the council's key risks. There is a revised planning process ongoing at the moment, so we're looking at the new council objectives, and we'll produce something that's a bit more visible in the next report that we do to make sure the alignment still retains to the corporate objectives and the main key risks. Planning is still agile. I mean, one positive thing I should mention is in terms of fraud, and that came in the last item, we are now attending, or a new corporate fraud forum has been set up, and we're meeting with the corporate fraud teams in many aspects, in many areas of the council, and we are considering the impact of fraud on the council. So again, we'll be able to feed into the risk assessment and hopefully make that very, very live. So that's a positive thing that's come recently. In terms of delivery, we've done 34 audits, 13 in draft and 17 in progress, and we're on track to deliver the annual plan and deliver an opinion. In terms of outcomes, positive, 83% of the work is positive assurance. We'll talk about the 2 significant audits that we found in this period later. In terms of action tracking, again, positive messages. There are no outstanding action or priority 1 and priority 2 actions for Q1 and for priority 1 and priority 2 actions for this period. So the council are in fact mitigating risks. So that's really positive. So overall, you know, I can give you an indicative opinion of reasonable at this stage. That you've got mostly sounding levels of internal control. Happily answer some questions if members have any.
Thanks very much, Ian. I've got a couple of specific questions, but I'll open to other committee members first. Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just looking at the dashboard, and I think there's 5 overdue actions on there, and I wondered what the significance maybe of those, Ian, whether they're and also what the reasons why they're still overdue, really. I think it's on page 78 of the pack.
Absolutely. I mentioned that there are no outstanding priority 1 and priority 2 recommendations, and that those are clearly the most important. What these are priority 3 actions, so they're of merit, and essentially they are actions that I think they are mentioned individually further down in the report on page. Bear with me a second. on page 89, there are 5 actions down there, and they have just slipped beyond the designated implementation date. So we'll be following up on those, and we continue to follow up on those. And we'll make sure that you are made aware of them, but we're actively liaising with the service all of the time to make sure that those issues are addressed. And if they're not, we'll keep bringing it back to this committee until they are.
Okay, so nothing of concern to note at the moment, based on the fact they're priority 3s in.
I would say so. That would be my professional opinion at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pete. Thanks, Ian. Any other questions on the summary report? Ian, I had a couple, and one of them actually links in a way to Councillor Chris's raising WCCIS earlier in the meeting. And I was just curious about page 70. Yeah, page 70 and page 69 and page 70 of the big pack, where there's no audit coverage, no future coverage planned. That was in relation to WCCIS, unreliability, and then also the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the pressure that that's putting on markets and things. And we've already touched on that earlier, but I just wondered about the appropriateness of none.
I think that's a good point you make, Chair. Obviously, with the WCCIS, that's a very specific risk, and I think the reality is that that's been dealt with in other parts of the council, so we're not specifically going to look at that issue in itself. However, in parts of our work that, with adults and children's social care, we will look at the role that WCCIS plays in the delivery of that service. So whilst it says none, there actually will be some coverage on the periphery of that. So maybe I need to relook at that, but there certainly will be some coverage of how WCCIS supports the authority. And in terms of Ukraine, it's the other way, really. The risk is so wide and far-reaching that we don't particularly look at the Ukraine as an issue itself, but we will look at many areas on that periphery again, around procurement. So we will touch on it, but not specifically that risk itself. So maybe I need to think of ways about how we can look at that periphery and reflect that in our coverage, and I'll happily do that.
Thanks very much, Ian. John, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I could return to Councillor Pete's point about on page 89. 2 of the overdue items relate to finance items, and both of them should have been completed around about a year ago. And both of them relate to conflict of interest. Can we, this issue has been going on for quite some time now. Could we please have a date, a time when we might see resolution of this? It should be quite simple.
Thanks for your question, John. Jane, can you take that, please?
If I can come in. Unfortunately, the action has been taken. What hasn't been updated is what you're seeing here in terms of the record. So I think that's really unfortunate, and I've been pushing to try and get this one, although it sits under finance, it's not just finance, obviously. From a legal perspective, it's got to be covered as well. So I want to give everybody some assurance that actually we have taken many of the actions involved there, but these records haven't been updated. So I will push to get them updated much stronger.
Okay, I think, can we have an action point on our action log around an expectation that this is updated, please?
Yeah.
Councillor Pete.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry, it was just your comment on audit coverage. I was just musing on that, actually, and is obviously being new to the committee. I suppose it was just a question for Ian. I was trying to understand the red, green, and the ambers there, and good coverage or non-coverage, as you were saying. So I mean, does good coverage mean there's one massive audit covering everything, or there's 25 minimal audits covering all? I suppose I was just trying to understand, what does audit coverage mean, if that makes sense?
Thanks, Councillor Pete. Ian, can you help us, please?
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And I guess the answer is, it is subjective. You know, obviously, you know, good, some and none is a subjective opinion that's put in there by myself as the head of audit. And often it's a mixture of both scenarios. So there could be one specific audit that looks at that one specific risk, or there could be many like if you look at some of the finance stuff, there are many areas of finance audit that we do that feed back into that. So I think we are re-looking at the way that we position our coverage. You know, in the next report, you'll see more clearer links to how that fits into the corporate objectives and the risk, and how our work links back to that. So you'll hopefully see moving into the future on that.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you very much for your questions, Councillor Pete. Any other points that colleagues wish to make? So I'll add in another couple of thoughts from me. Kind of prompted by Councillor Pete's questions about the late actions, and John's point as well. There's a lot of there's the balance between draft reports and signed off reports. I was just curious that we have quite a lot in draft, and I was wondering about does the council have a protocol with swap around, once you give a draft report to officers, is there an expectation that any points of factual correction or clarification and then their management actions are discharged within 2 weeks or 2 months, or is there a protocol? Because if there's not, it might be helpful if there were. And the other thought I had was, where actions have not been completed, do we then have a loop back to the risk register? Because given that there is a link between internal audit and risk, that's what it's all about, where actions have not been implemented in the timescales that they have been committed to, do we then circulate that back to the risk register? Because if the actions aren't implemented, my sense is that that's a risk. So
would you like me to comment,
yeah,
Chair?
if you're with where I'm going with this, Ian.
Absolutely. I think on the first subject of draft reports, clearly when we do a piece of work there, we identify that maybe some risks and some weaknesses out there, and clearly from our perspective we're moving to a more agile approach and involving the client in that reporting process. So you should find that things are actually addressed before we ever get to a report stage, but also the report is the formalization of that, and it's really important that we move through that in an agile way so that those risks are addressed. You mentioned that we've got a quarter of our work plan at the moment that is in that draft stage, and I think it is very important that between us and the authority we have an agile way of moving quickly on those. So it's something that's on my radar as well, and maybe it's something that we can consider as part of the internal audit working group around the agility of the way that that we move through the audit process, and look to support that. So that's where I feel in terms of the draft report. In terms of the risk, I also agree with you. In the risk register, there are a number of mitigating actions, and often our work program is concerned around testing those mitigating actions. So if we do some work and we find that those mitigating actions aren't working, then clearly that will have an impact on the risk register. So I think it would be good to kind of square the circle and make sure that we do feed in, and and our audit findings are recognised in the risk register in some way.
Thank you very much, Ian. If you could take that forward with colleagues and consider how that could work in practice. I'm going to bring in Councillor William.
Thank you. Could I just ask Ian to expand a little bit on his comments about draft reports and ask a candid question, really? Is there a link between the level of draft reports that we currently have and capacity? Because obviously there's something slightly debilitating about having things that are not fully signed off, not final, not just in terms of the time allocated to them, but then the fact that colleagues can't, despite the benefits of multitasking, can't necessarily be progressing that to completion while undertaking the necessary groundwork on other areas. And there's a danger that our whole sort of governance and improvement process is undermined. I mean, obviously resource is hugely tight, but to what extent is this linked to capacity, whether it's internal or through partners such as SWAP?
Thank you, Councillor William. I think these days inspection is very much the norm in the local authority, and so parts of the council are very much aware of it and are well set up to respond. So I think from a positive point of view, we have that culture there. But as you say, resources are stretched for both the internal auditors and the local authority, and sometimes that can have an impact on how quickly evidence can be produced as part of the audit process itself, but also in agreeing the draft report. What I will say is that the internal audit process is not infallible, and sometimes we can make mistakes or draw judgments incorrectly. So it is really important to make sure that we get to the end process in a very structured way. But in answer, waffling around, I think in answer to your question, I think that resource, the lack of resources does have a small impact on how quickly we can respond and we get responses. But overall, I'm happy that the council are working with us to try and resolve that wherever we have those issues.
Thank you, Ian, for that moderate level of reassurance. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor William. If there are no further questions on Ian's quarterly report, I'm going to move us on to the CHC Limited Internal Audit Report and ask Ian to introduce the report briefly. But I think we do really need to sort of have a good discussion on this. And for this item, welcoming Councillor Shan Cox, and I think Nina is also going to be responding on these items as well. So thank you very much. Ian, I'll pass to you to briefly introduce.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just, I think it's on page 91 of the report agenda pack, which is the full report. So continuing healthcare, CHC, I'll refer to it from now on, is the service that happens when somebody is essentially discharged from hospital and they need care. In terms of the findings of the audit, or the key findings of the audit, were around the fact that we had things like a national framework, but we haven't agreed local operating protocols, and that caused some problems. That there were recent improvements, that we could see improvement, but there was a lack of visibility around performance. So we couldn't really tell how well they were delivering the council's role in the CHC discharge process. That there were excessive delays and disputes over funding decisions that may in fact have a knock-on effect with the client, and that we felt that there should be more visibility and monitoring of CHC health board debts. Of course, this report has been done and the delivery of the services has been done in the backdrop of COVID, so we've no doubt that has impacted on service delivery. But overall, we've got 4 recommendations, all priority 2s. We felt that it was a limited assurance opinion and that there were some significant weaknesses and risks that needed to be addressed. Is that okay, Chair?
Thank you very much. before I open the floor for questions, I would like to give Councillor Cox or Nina the opportunity to say something before I open it up. If either of you would like to come in. If you don't want to come in at this stage, that's fine, but I want to give you the opportunity to come in at this stage.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay, I'd like to hand over to Michael Gray, who's the Head of Service for Adult Social Care, who's happy to set some context to this and provide initial service response. So with your permission, Chair, I'd like to hand to Michael. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and you're very welcome, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina, and thanks, Chair. So yes, happy to provide some context. First of all, I think it's important that we understand what continuing healthcare is. It's not necessarily a service that people receive when they leave hospital, although it can be. Continuing healthcare is a complete package of ongoing care that would be arranged and funded solely by the NHS through local health boards, where it's deemed that an individual's primary health need has been assessed as health-based. And that continuing healthcare can be provided in any setting. So it may be a person's own home, or it may be a care home. The important thing to note here is that given that it's funded by the NHS, continuing healthcare is an entitlement for individuals that are eligible to receive it. And the way that local health boards seek to administer the continuing healthcare process in Wales is via the 2022 National Continuing Healthcare Framework for Implementation. That essentially sets out the arrangements for the effective and the efficient delivery of continuing NHS healthcare in Wales. And it sets out the process for the NHS, working alongside partners such as ourselves as a local authority to assess an individual's health needs and to ensure that appropriate care is in place to meet those needs. So I hope that's helpful context before I talk to the actions. As Ian said, there was 4 actions. The first action was in relation to Powys County Council working alongside Powys Teaching Health Board to establish a formal standard operating procedure, which would include a dispute protocol. In other words, the agreement that we would have in place when we disagree to try and resolve these disagreements. Now, as the continuing healthcare framework is a health-led process, we do rely on a certain extent to the health board when it comes to timescales and the priority for this piece of work. Unfortunately, to date, there is still not a standard operating protocol in place, nor is there a dispute protocol. It's not for want of Powys County Council trying. We have provided extensive comments on a draft version of a standard operating protocol that was sent to us in February 2021. We offered further comments in March 2021, and we have sought clarification since then as to when that standard operating protocol and the necessary dispute resolution process will be signed off by Powys Teaching Health Board. To date, that has still not been signed off. So at this point in time, whilst the framework strongly advocates that a local dispute resolution protocol is put in place, we don't have a signed off version at this point. It is an issue that I've raised on a number of occasions with Powys Teaching Health Board. The second action was in relation to Adult Services reviewing its internal processes to ensure that the monitoring of progress in all continuing healthcare cases are as efficient as possible. I think we have made some strong developments here with regards to our internal processes. We have got a dedicated continuing healthcare team within Powys County Council. They have a tracker of all the continuing healthcare cases that we are currently liaising with Powys Teaching Health Board on. And we also hold regular surgeries for all adult social care staff where anonymised cases can be discussed and noted. Operational teams also have reminders to inform our dedicated continuing healthcare team to let them know about any multidisciplinary meetings where a primary health need may or may not be identified. so that we can keep that tracker up to date. And we have also in recent times created a dedicated continuing healthcare email address. So there's one clear point of contact for our operational staff to feed into our dedicated continuing healthcare team. The third action was in relation to the dispute process, and I think I've probably covered that already, very much related to action 1. We have had various workshops with Powys Teaching Health Board, but as I said, at this point in time, a formal standard operating procedure and dispute process is still not in place. I think it should be noted that ultimately any decisions regarding eligibility for continuing healthcare are the responsibility of the local health board through their own quality assurance processes and ratification processes. So we are relying on Powys Teaching Health Board to work alongside us to get those documents signed off. The fourth action was in relation to financial implications, management of debt. We have committed to undertaking a review as to how we as a continuing healthcare team collate our information. We've also, since the audit, developed improved communications, I believe, with our finance team to stop payments when necessary and to request credit notes when necessary. And any invoices raised by the finance team goes through to the usual Powys County Council debt management processes. So again, I think we can provide some assurances that we've made progress there. And so that's a very high level overview of our responses to the actions to date. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that extremely helpful context setting and run through the report. I can see that Nina wants to come in on your back, and then John.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Michael. It's really helpful, I think, and important for us all, as a committee to have that context and background to this. Since I've taken over my role as Interim Director of Social Services and Housing, I have developed a very close working relationship with colleagues across Powys Teaching Health Board. We're working very closely on a daily kind of basis, working together, to address the winter pressures, issues with hospital discharges, and just the pressure in the health and care sector at the moment. So I just wanted to give you that assurance that we've got really positive working relationships, and these are improving all the time. And I'm confident that progress will be made on the actions that have been outlined on this CHC moving forward over the coming months. So I just wanted to give you that assurance that as a director, I am working with counterparts in Powys Teaching Health Board very closely. And this is on our agenda and something that will be addressed. And I hope to be bringing positive update to you in due course.
Thanks very much, Nina. I mean, it's really important that partnership working is the foundation of the relationship. I mean, I'm assuming, it's not necessarily, it's not your role, but I'm assuming that this is on our agenda, it's on the Cabinet's agenda, therefore we need to assume that it's also on the Health Board's board agenda. So perhaps through your discussions and collaboration with the executives in the Health Board, we could seek assurance that the board of the Health Board is aware of this and the fact that it is not quite functioning the way that it should be at the moment, to put it mildly. John, and then Councillor Chris.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question really is surrounding the historic debts. They were first highlighted, I think, when the accounts were produced for the previous financial year, and they were quite significant, and we were promised action at the very highest level to try and recover some of these monies. Well, I realise you can't go into a great deal of detail, but can somebody please give us a sort of outline of the progress and what the future might hold in this respect? Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Can you address this historic debts question, please?
I can inform you that Cabinet have made a decision on some historic debts, and I think that's already been approved and gone through the Cabinet process. So they have now been resolved. Some of the longer standing ones have been resolved, and we're waiting just to finalise some of that detail. Otherwise, in terms of ongoing debts between the organisations, we do meet regularly, both myself and the Director of Finance, with the Health Board, and the accountants corresponding in both organisations do meet regularly to try and clear as much as possible and resolve any issues so that we can clear that down as quickly as possible. I can tell you that as part of the Treasury Management report, Cabinet have asked for some more information around the levels of debt, specifically in adult social care. And you will have seen that report coming through here, and I think you will be seeing the Q3 report shortly. And the volumes and the amounts involved are considerable, so it's important that we do clear that down as quickly as possible. So that piece of work has been requested now by Cabinet as well, so we will be undertaking a bit of a deep dive in that area as well.
That's really good to know, Jane, that it's firmly on Cabinet's agenda. Councillor Chris. You're still on mute, I think, or your mic's gone a bit funny again, Councillor Chris. We're not hearing you.
That better?
Yes, we've got you now.
Technology is wonderful at times, but in relation to it, first question is to Ian. When you've done these reports, obviously you're focused on Powys County Council and our response. Obviously, this agenda item looks at another organisation, and I just wondered whether there's any link into those other organisations when you're looking at where there's a potential crossover, particularly when it comes to like budgets and some decision making, because otherwise you're going to have a patient or a client in the middle, because you're dealing with one side of an organisation that we've got, say, a vested interest in, yet the impact of that decision making also sits with somebody else as well. And I just wondered whether you do make any mitigations to that, because on my brief scan of the report I didn't necessarily see that, and I wanted to just get that clarity.
Certainly, Councillor Chris. Your brief scan would be correct, that we have only approached this from the one side. We've only looked at the one side, which is the impact that it has on Powys County Council. We haven't considered the impact from the Health Board side, and we didn't. You know, it's an area. It's a good point. We didn't liaise with the Health Board as part of this review, but perhaps we could have improved it if we had done that. So I think that's a really good point.
My other observation is that within the report there was some mention about Powys County Council staff having individualised training sessions which enabled to help staff on the ground be able to challenge some of the decision-making process, particularly with our Health Board colleagues, which I think is always positive. I just wanted to seek assurances, and again, do note the comments made by Michael and by Nina in relation to the working relationship, which seems to have been moving forward in a positive direction with the Health Board, about shared training provision, because understanding it from both sides of that equation is really helpful, and sometimes helps to get a resolution before they need to be escalated. And then my third question, sorry, Chair, is about that escalation process. If we've then got a client or an individual that we believe that it should sit with the Health Board, what is that escalation process? Even though I do acknowledge what Michael was saying, that it's not in place, the disputes process. There's got to be some form of escalation of what we do internally, and it's just having that assurance that there's something in place internally to be able to move things forward.
Thank you very much for your questions, Councillor Chris. Michael or Nina, could you support answering Councillor Chris's questions?
Yes, I'll do my best. Thanks, Councillor Chris. Thanks, Chair. With regards to the training, we benefit from very good, robust training from a legal expert that provides us with training not only on continuing healthcare but wider aspects of legislation that impacts on continuing healthcare, such as Mental Health Act, Mental Capacity Act, and the expectation is that all practitioners will be going through that training so that we've got a consistency of approach, and so we understand the framework in the context of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act as well, because that act is very clear on what the legal thresholds are as to what social services can provide. We have had conversations with Powys Teaching Health Board previously, pre-business continuity and pre-pandemic, around actually having joint training. And personally, I think that would be a good idea, because we could have health practitioners and social care practitioners receiving the same training at the same time. That's not something that we've managed to implement yet, but I do recall that there was an appetite to do that. In terms of the escalation process, the framework offers a very high level understanding of what that dispute resolution process may look like. But as I said, it does encourage local health boards and local authorities to develop their own nuanced process. Ultimately, what happens is that the expectation initially is that the multidisciplinary team that come together with their own respective assessments should be in the position to make a decision as to whether or not a primary health need exists. And that should, as a norm, be ratified through the health board's quality assurance processes. When either the multidisciplinary team isn't able to make a decision, or there's a dispute between that MDT and the ratification process, that's when we find ourselves having to look at the escalation process. What tends to happen is it will be for the two respective senior managers between the two organisations to have a look at the case in more detail and look to resolve at that level. If not, it gets moved to my level as a head of service, and I'll be liaising with my counterpart in the NHS. If it can't be resolved at that level, it ends up going to director level. What we have found previously is that at the point it gets to the director level, the directors are often asking that multidisciplinary team to reconvene in order to actually make a decision, because the further up the hierarchy it goes, the less close to the detail the officers in question are. So that's how it should work in theory. In reality, it doesn't usually progress beyond senior manager, because at that point we're usually able to resolve. So that's how it works in practice at this point in time. But coming back to the actions, we've not got that formal process set out at this point.
Thank you, Michael. Does that answer your questions?
Yes, it does. And I mean, it's not the first time I've heard that, so I'm on there, but at least there is on there, and I think it does need to come back to that multidisciplinary team who have got all of the information to make that decision-making process.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chris. Thanks. I'm going to bring in Councillor Pete and then Councillor William.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to try and understand or tease out a bit more around the phrase about we could be illegally funding care. And I was trying to understand what are the consequences of that, and also how much is at risk. And I suppose following on from that, I was trying to understand, is the debate around who pays, i.e. the health board, us or the client, and not around whether the individual gets the care. And I suppose then finally from there, if it's deemed to be the client who has to pay, what happens if that client is unable to pay?
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Who can help Councillor Pete with his questions? Would that be you, Michael?
Yeah, I can give it a go. So the thanks, Councillor Pete. The question in relation to legal thresholds, it's quite clearly stated in the Social Services and Wellbeing Act that a local authority can't meet a person's needs for care and support by arranging for the provision of a service if that's required to be provided under a health enactment. So for those that are interested, that's section 47.1 of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act. That essentially means that if it has been identified, or if it's been identified that somebody has a primary health need, we cannot legally fund that care because it's the responsibility of the NHS. I think the question around the impact on the individual in question, well, if we find ourselves in a position where an individual does have a primary health need, but that's not been ratified by a health board, that individual will likely have their care funded at that point or organised via the local authority. The local authority is in a position to seek a contribution from that individual towards their own care, which means that that individual in turn is illegally funding their own care. So there are quite serious impacts, and I think a moral impact as well. If somebody has a primary health need, that need should be met free at the point of need, and that individual shouldn't be funding towards it. So that's why it's really important for us as a local authority that we work consistently with every single case to make sure that as a partnership we're getting these decisions right.
Thank you very much, Michael. Councillor Pete, does that answer your questions?
Yes, that does. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I'll bring in Councillor William.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Michael, for speaking to the report and for answering our questions as candidly as you have been. I just wanted to check what is the level of involvement and what is the importance of primary care, particularly GP practices in bringing sort of improvement and resolution in some of these cases, because I was expecting that, because that would be the primary contact for many people in the sort of post-hospital period. I know that obviously general practice has got a different relationship with the health board in terms of its role as contractors, so that one remove. But often it's at that level that I have issues brought to my attention. I've got a couple in my case file at the moment about different aspects to do with post-hospital care, and I've had some involvement with the CHC, and I've expected there to be a little bit more focus on that aspect of things in the report, but maybe I'm sort of misguided in that.
Thanks, Councillor William. Michael?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor William. Well, I can't comment on the in detail on the role of GPs within the health-led process, although the likelihood is that those practitioners will likely have a say in some cases. The multidisciplinary team process, the process to determine whether or not a primary health need exists, is undertaken via what we call a decision support tool. And to put that simply, that's really bringing together all the relevant organisations and agencies that are involved in that individual's health and care, bringing together all the respective assessments and making a decision based on that evidence as to the level of the nature, the intensity, the complexity and the unpredictability of that overall need, and how those different domains interface with one another. And that's how the decision is determined as to whether or not somebody has a primary health need. So we may well find that general practitioners have a role to play in that process, More often than not, it tends to be the likes of social workers, occupational therapists, and clinical staff such as nurses that will be part of that multidisciplinary team process.
Thank you. Could I also ask, as a supplementary, whether in certain situations community pharmacy also has a role? Because increasingly I'm aware, as there appear, whether or not it's true, there appear to be more obstacles and more gatekeeping in terms of access to primary care. More and more people that I'm aware of rely increasingly on the expertise of their local community pharmacist. I mean, that I would have thought could be an area where some important information is lost unless they're bound in some way to that process.
Yeah, I think again, in making the deliberation on whether or not a primary health need exists, there may be evidence that would be useful from a community pharmacist that could inform that decision. I can't comment on how often that happens because it's dependent on the individual. But as I said, all practitioners, agencies that are involved in that individual's health and care should be involved in that overall process of determining that eligibility.
Thank you, Michael. I'm conscious that my colleague who's now indicated knows more about this area than I do, so I'm very happy to give way if the chair is inclined to see his on.
Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, sorry, just relating to pharmacies and the common ailment scheme. There's 26 services that a pharmacy can distribute a prescription for on that. The only issue we're having across the county is it has to be an assigned pharmacist, and we have a number of operations like Boots and others that perhaps they have to move their pharmacist to another one, so you end up someone who's operating the pharmacy who can dispense medication is not able then to do the prescription part. So it's a very ad hoc at the moment. So when it's going well, it goes really well. And you can go into someone, regularly and get those common ailment scheme support. But the issue is the qualification to dispense them. I hope that puts some light for you, Will.
Thank you very much, both. Thanks, Councillor Gareth. Any further questions before we move on to the Dolls report? Just from me, and these may seem quite low level compared to the quality of the discussion that we've had. But the two of the action points, the responsible officer has signed as not applicable because it's a Powys Teaching Health Board lead. That doesn't rest very easily with me. In fact, I'm quite uncomfortable with it, notwithstanding the fact that it is ultimately Powys Teaching Health Board's call and responsibility. I think we need to have a responsible officer within the council identified, linked to those actions. And I'm also not really a fan of timescales that say ongoing. So I would really encourage you, please, if you could put a named individual from the authority as the responsible officer, in as much as the authority has a significant stake in this, and think about the timescales for me, please. I know that might feel quite pedantic, but I think it is important in terms of accountability.
Chair, if I may come in here, absolutely take on board your comments there. I would suggest that my name goes down as the Director of Social Services. I'm happy to have that, and I can provide that leadership and oversight then for these actions. As to with regards to the timescales, would you allow me to take that away, please? And then I'll give that some significant thought, discuss it with Powys Teaching Health Board colleagues, and I'll make sure that that gets updated. But I take on board your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your answer, Nina. Thank you, because this is what it's about ultimately. So thank you. We'll move on to the deprivation of liberty safeguards report. And I guess really just in moving on, it's worth just reminding ourselves, I think we hardly need reminding, that both of these reports have at the heart of them the care and work around some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. So I think that's just worth bearing in mind. Ian, if you could briefly introduce the DOLS report, and then same as before, I'll ask the team and Councillor Cox if they wish to comment, and then open the floor for a question and answer session. Ian. You're on mute, Ian.
Apologies, Chair. The report is on page 99 of the agenda pack, and it's about the deprivation of liberty safeguarding, which I'll refer to as DOLS because it's much easier to say. DOLS is the procedure that would deprive a patient of their liberty when they lack capacity, and it's around the assessment of that process. The report that we did followed on from a report that we previously did in 2019-20, which identified significant issues at that stage as well. And from that report, I think it's fair to say that there's been some improvement in some areas, but there's still significant outstanding areas as well. So there were two main points we identified, or two key findings. The first was around delivery. And what you find is when an assessment needs to be made, there are statutory timescales that are put in place, and that will be 7 days for an urgent referral and 21 days for a standard assessment. And what we found is that there were lengthy delays. The metrics in there show that we failed to meet those timescales. So that was the first issue that we identified that needed addressing. The second area was around the process itself, and the fact that we need to undertake a best interest assessment as part of this process, and it's around the ability to do that. And we determined that there was little internal capacity to do that at this stage when we did the audit, and there was also only limited external capacity. So as a result of that, the resource that they needed to undertake this assessment was lacking in those areas. So we identified two actions, a priority 1 and a priority 2, and as previously, it was limited assurance, so we felt there were significant risks and weaknesses out there. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ian. Nina and Michael, would you like to say anything in response before I open the floor?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, I'd like to invite Michael to provide some context and a service update with regards to this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Michael, over to you, and then I'll bring John in for questions once Michael's given us his context.
Thanks, Nina, and thank you, Chair. So, as Ian said, DOLS, really important part of the Mental Capacity Act, because essentially what deprivation of liberty safeguards does is it makes sure that if there is somebody who can't consent to their own care arrangements in a care home or a hospital, those arrangements are protected if it means they're going to be deprived of their liberty. And the arrangements are assessed to check that they're necessary and in the person's best interests. And just so we've got a shared understanding of what we mean by deprivation of liberty, the test case goes back to a Supreme Court judgment back in 2014 that made reference to what they called the asset test, which consisted of two questions that we would need to ask. Question 1 would be, is the person subject to continuous supervision and control, and is the person free to leave? If somebody is subject to that level of continuous supervision and they're not free to leave that setting, it's almost certain that they're going to be deprived of their liberty. And we've got an obligation as a local authority, as the supervisory body, to determine whether or not the DOLS applications can be authorised. So that's hopefully some useful context for this report. To provide an update on the actions, we now have a peer support group. This has proven really beneficial in supporting our current best interest assessors with their role. We're also looking to create internal best interest assessor positions, although as Ian has acknowledged, that is difficult to do in the current situation we find ourselves in with regards to capacity. We've also offered payment to internal best interest assessors for additional hours in order to support our backlog of DOLS authorisations, whilst the DOLS legislation remains. We've also established a clear framework for overseeing and monitoring the quality assurance and the timeliness of assessments that we allocate to external agencies, independent best interest assessors, and Section 12 doctors. In terms of resources, we've now got Mental Capacity Act and DOLS resources that have been updated on our internal intranet SharePoint page. That enables access to all our managers and staff to best practice guidance. I also already mentioned that we've got a Mental Capacity Act and DOLS forum in place now for managers to share learning from cases and promote communication and joint working between different operational teams. In terms of agency work, whilst we had difficulties previously in securing agency staff to undertake some of the work for us, we've now got 2 agencies that we work with regularly that have got a dedicated focus on looking to reduce the backlog of DOLS authorisations. And we've also recently gained agreement with 3 additional independent best interest assessors on a monthly basis who are also helping to reduce our number of assessments. We've also used recent funding from Welsh Government to secure an additional internal best interest assessor employed with us for 18.5 hours a week on a temporary arrangement that's subject to further review. And I just wanted to mention that in terms of our total outstanding applications, if we go back to the start of January 2022, that was 357. What we have noticed as a result of getting these actions in place is that since September of last year, there has been a downward trend of outstanding applications. As of January of this year, we have 279 outstanding applications. And whilst I don't have the February data at this point, my understanding is that that will be reducing further. So we have made positive progress in reducing those outstanding applications as well. And once again, happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Michael. I'll bring in John and then I'll bring in Councillor Gareth.
Thank you, Chair. My first point was going to be what is the current position, and Michael has kindly updated us to a certain extent on that. I have to say I find the statistics here rather alarming. If we seem to be way adrift of statutory requirements. That said, I thoroughly dislike averages because they can hide things that are existing at either end of the spectrum. What I would like to know is there a procedure in place which prioritizes people in the position in the queue? And does if that is the case and people are jumping the queue, is there a procedure to have a look at the other end of the spectrum and look at people who've been awaiting review for an awful long time? Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks, John.
Thanks, John. There is not going to be a case of anyone jumping a queue. I think, as Ian said, there is a distinction to be made between urgent authorisations and standard authorisations. The urgent authorisations we will authorise within that time frame. In terms of the standard authorisations, we are working through them in the order that we received them. And what I can say is that after allocations last week, we've significantly reduced the total number of outstanding allocations. So any allocations made to us in 2020-21, there are none left. For 21-22, there are 16, which we are working on, and then the rest are for the previous year, which we continue to work on to maintain that oversight. The best interest assessor that we employed on a temporary basis works very closely on a day-to-day basis with our senior manager for contact and safeguarding, who's also got responsibility for the DOLS authorization function. And so we do monitor this on a daily basis, and we report these figures in our monthly reporting as well. And what I would say in terms of the figures, I agree, it is far less than ideal that we've got outstanding applications. If we were to look at the situation in the rest of Wales and actually across England as well, we will find that every local authority across the land will have outstanding applications. And that goes back to some previous legislative changes which reduced the threshold for what constituted a deprivation of liberty. And what we found as a result of that as local authorities was with the threshold reducing, there was a significantly higher level of DOLS authorizations that were coming into supervisory bodies to authorize.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, you have answered the question very well. Can I just ask what percentage of referrals actually end up as being approved deprivations?
Really interesting question, and I don't have that answer for you just now. I can certainly go away and find out. It might be useful for people on the call to know that actually, to get to the point that we can determine whether or not a DOLS application should be authorised is quite an intensive piece of work. There's 6 parts to that overall assessment. First of all, the individual needs to be 18 or over. Secondly, they must have a quote-unquote mental disorder. Thirdly, they must lack capacity to make their own decisions around treatment or care. The 4th assessment is around best interests. So in other words, if the deprivation of liberty is due to take place, is it in that person's interests? Is it a reasonable response to the likelihood of that individual suffering harm? And then we need to look at eligibility. So if the person cannot already be detained under other legislation, for example, the Mental Health Act, we would need to make sure that that legislation applied rather than applying for a deprivation of liberty safeguard authorization. And finally, we need to make sure that we've taken account of no refusals. So there are many individuals out there that may have advanced decisions in terms of refusing treatment, and there also may be court-appointed deputies or lasting power of attorneys that will have power over the decisions that are made. So quite an intensive process to get through for us to be assured as to whether or not we can authorize those DOLS applications. But it is a very interesting question. I'll go away and try and find out.
Thank you. My point really was looking at trying to relieve the pressure by cutting back for the demand, if you understand me.
Yeah. I think the difficulty is we have to go through those 6 parts before we can determine whether or not that authorization is justified. So I think it would be very difficult from the outset to say we don't believe we should go through that process because we're legally obliged to do so.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Michael. Councillor Gareth, and then after Councillor Gareth, I'll bring in Councillor Peake.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. Just looking at the report and the assessments process and timelines, it's really good looking. Obviously, the work that's been done around reducing the days for urgent and standard, but then renewal and review days have shot up. So obviously, that's you solve one problem, you cause another. And I note in there that the panel referrals have dropped as well. So I'm just wondering, just a little bit more backup information on that data, because to me it's saying, yeah, we've front loaded and supported people coming in, but actually we've got a problem when we get to the renewal and review stage, and we've changed our processes because we're not using the panels much.
Yeah, Yeah, again, really interesting question. When it comes to reviews of deprivation of liberty authorisations, that is a formal process, but it can take place at any time. It doesn't need to be at the end of the authorised period. And so to a certain extent, as a supervisory body, we need to react to changing circumstances, and we may be asked to review sooner than we had initially envisaged. And I think that's probably not quite reflected in those high-level stats that you see in the report above you today. But yes, I absolutely take your point. It's one thing actually reducing the backlog of the initial authorizations so that the person is deprived of their liberty and legally so. We've then got an obligation to review, and that's another backlog that we need to contend with.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your question, and thank you, Michael. Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the priorities there, and especially that priority 1 action that's to be done. And I suppose if our current assessment processes aren't in line with legal requirements, my question was, what are the consequences of breaching the statutory timescales? Because you know, is it comparable to something like the Data Protection Act, for example, where there's a big monetary fine? So I'll be interested in what the consequences are. But then, if I'm reading it correctly as well, and COVID notwithstanding, it sounds like we've been breaching the law for the last 5 years. So therefore, with this being a priority 1, and with that in place, I just wondered why there's a timeline of 12 months for that particular action to be addressed.
Thank you, Councillor Peat, for your question. You took those words straight out of my mouth. Thank you very much for that intervention. No, don't apologise. And before I ask Michael to come in and answer that question, I'm just going to make a link between what Councillor Peat said and the risk appetite paper. I'm not going to say any more, but if you wish to go back to look at the risk appetite paper and then think on Councillor Peat's observations about us being in breach of our statutory duties, I'll just make that observation and invite Michael to answer Councillor Peat's question.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Peat. I think in terms of the consequences, I think it remains relatively unknown at this point in time because, as I said, every local authority will have a backlog to some degree of assessments that are yet to be authorised. This is something that's openly acknowledged by the government, and I think that's probably provides a context for why we're awaiting further information from the government as to what the transition from deprivation of liberty safeguards to liberty protection safeguards will look like, because whilst the underlying legislation will remain the same, the big difference between DOLS and LPS will be that there is only going to be 3 statutory assessments that need to be undertaken as opposed to 6 independent assessments, and there will be no referral for a DOLS authorisation under liberty protection safeguards. The process itself will be integrated into care and support planning, and I think that's partly an acknowledgement that there may be a more seamless way of getting to the point that we can meet our obligations under the Mental Capacity Act. And I know that in one of the actions in the report is around working alongside staff to prepare the workforce for the transition to liberty protection safeguards. We're not aware when that is going to be launched as yet. We have responded to an extensive consultation last summer, which was to inform the final code of practice. But we've not yet had any further insight from Welsh Government as to when the current DOLS arrangements will be switched off and we'll need to transition to the liberty protection safeguard arrangements.
Thank you, Michael. Councillor Peat, does that answer your question?
I think it may have answered it, one of them partially, which it sounds like the law as it is at the moment may be a bit toothless or something in regards to the statutory timescales. But I wasn't quite sure. I got an answer, Michael, as to why, if this is still a priority one, why it's 12 months to address it.
Okay, so if this is in relation to building support internally for more best interest assessors to take on assessments and attracting more freelance assessors to support those assessments, in an ideal world, it would be less than 12 months. But I think what we were trying to do here, and what our auditors were trying to do here as well, was to be realistic, given the current capacity issues that we have. Adult Services finds itself in business continuity at this point in time. We have a number of vacancies that remain unfilled, and many of those individuals could feasibly be trained best interest assessors. So we need to be realistic about what we can do with the current resources we have within the current financial envelope afforded to us. That's not to say that this doesn't remain a priority. It absolutely does. It's fundamental, as the chair set out at the beginning, to supporting individuals who lack capacity, to make sure that when there is a deprivation of liberty, that deprivation is legal according to the legislation.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you, Councillor Peat, for your questions. But any further questions or points on this? I've got a final question for Ian, really, and it's kind of linked to the 12 months. So we would expect that the 12 months will be up in October this year. So Ian, when would it be planned to audit this area again?
We will revisit the area. I think in the spirit of openness, there's no point us going back if we clearly know it hasn't been addressed. So I think as soon as we have some indications, the 12 months is going to expire soon, and it will be on our agenda then. Yeah. But I think what we need to do is liaise with Michael clearly to make sure that those things are being addressed. And if not, either Michael or myself can come back to you with updates.
I think
the important thing is that we do address do address it, and
it's really important that we address it. But we've put 12 months on the report, and that's October 2023, I think. Yeah. So I think the committee would like some assurance at the point that the 12-month period is up that the actions have been discharged or not, and if they haven't been, what are the implications for risk? Because it goes right round the cycle.
Well, I think the action tracker is the answer, because this will appear, in October. I think the report is January now, so it's 12 months since. So that 12 months will be up in next October. At that point, if it hasn't been addressed, the action tracker will pick that up. I guess the question is whether the committee think 12 months exposes the council to excessive risk in that interim period, and I guess that risk could be around litigation, maybe, where the council may have been proved to be negligent or could be negligent. So that's the potential risk there.
Well, my sense from Councillor Peat's line of questioning, and I'll bring him back in a moment, and from John's line of questioning, is that 12 months is quite a long time, but I'm also cognizant of Michael's response to Councillor Peat in that the team would appear to be doing the best they possibly can in the context of the resources that they have. But if it is 12 months, I do think we need something at 12 months to take stock of where we are. Councillor Peat.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I suppose what I'm trying to weigh up in my mind is I understand Michael's point as well and what he's saying. Obviously, there's the individuals to concern as well. But I suppose what I'm trying to weigh up is if this was, say, a breach of data protection law, we wouldn't have an action there saying we're going to do that in 12 months' time because of the consequences of breaching that. So what I'm just struggling with is I can't weigh up that phrase, we're breaching statutory timescales, and the implications of that, because depending on what those implications are, as well as the individual in Michael's resource, that's what would drive the timescale for me. But 12 months for priority one, where we've been in breach for 5 years, just seems too long.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. I think Councillor Peake, John and myself have expressed our concerns about the length of time and the need to have some kind of report at the end of that 12-month period, albeit we think that that is a long time. Michael has explained the challenges of resourcing. I think I will leave this one with senior officers and Councillor Cox to deliberate on. Michael, thank you very, very much for your support today to our discussions. It's been really, really, really helpful. So although we are still querying the service and our statutory duties, that's no reflection on the contribution that you've made to the meeting today and the work that you clearly do every single day. So thank you, Michael. And Nina, I'll give the last word to you. You're on mute. I've given you the last word and you're
sorry.
on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say, note your comments and concerns around the timescale there, and just to give you that assurance that Councillor Cox and senior leadership will take that away. But I just wanted to assure you that, that 12 months timescale doesn't mean nothing's happening. Things are happening, actions are being taken place, are in place already, and we're already seeing the positive impact of those actions. I think it's just a recognition from the service that this will take time, but just to note that we will take that way absolutely and reflect on your comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nina. Thank you, Councillor Cox, and thank you, Michael. Your attendance is very much appreciated. So, notwithstanding the fact that we are running a wee bit behind, I am going to give us 5 minutes just to draw breath, as my assessment of long meetings is actually if you have a short break, you will be slightly more effective in a long meeting. So notwithstanding the fact that we're running behind time, could we reconvene at about 3 minutes past 12, please? So I'm going to, we are going to start 3 minutes past 12. Okay, thanks everybody. Thank you very much, colleagues, for returning after our short break. We will move on to agenda item 6, which comprises 2 items, the first of which is Audit Wales report on corporate safeguarding, and the second is the Q2 Audit Wales work programme and timetable. So I'll bring in Audit Wales colleagues to introduce the corporate safeguarding report, and then I'll give the opportunity to senior officers to respond, and then we'll have a session for questions and answers. So Bethan, who's going to kick us off for the Audit Wales team?
I'm happy to kick off, and then I'll hand over to Bethany and take you quickly through the report.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Non. And then Ian and Bethan. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you very much for inviting us today. This is a follow-up report from a previous report that we presented to the Council in 2014. And we did that work, and also a national piece of work also around the review of corporate safeguarding arrangements. Now, corporate safeguarding arrangements are arrangements across the council, and what we have looked at here is the way that the council has managed and has control arrangements in place to manage that corporate ness across the council, and the corporate governance of it in particular. So what do the oversight arrangements, and how are you working according to your own commitments to corporate safeguarding? So this is follow up at this year. So we did the work last year. It was originally part of our audit plan for 2020-21, but obviously given the pandemic, and we were flexible in our approach in responding to the business continuity that social services in particular went into. Therefore, that's why we did the work last year rather than in the previous year. So at that point, I'll invite Ian and Bethan to take you through our conclusion.
Thank you very much, Non. Yeah, just quickly, I'm going to be handing over to Ian in a minute because he's the one who did the majority of the work. But just to say, we don't propose on going through this report in detail. We'll sort of give a high-level overview of this one and then take any questions afterwards. But obviously, the focus of today is really on the response of the council and what the plans are to take it forward and how those plans are going to be monitored going forward. So I'll just pass over to Ian now, if I can.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, as Non said, this report's a follow-up looking at to what extent the council had acted on the recommendations from our 2014 and 2015 reports. Our overall message is that we're concerned as the council still doesn't have proper control of its corporate safeguarding arrangements, and that exposes the council and its residents to risk. So in short, around 7 or 8 years after the initial reports, we found the council still doesn't have various key mechanisms in place that would help it to have a proper handle on its corporate safeguarding arrangements. The summary section of the report sets out that the council needs to take urgent steps to strengthen its corporate safeguarding arrangements and its oversight. There were key governance issues that it needed to address. These included publishing a corporate safeguarding policy, which the council had never had. That made it an outlier amongst other councils, although a policy has subsequently been produced. And also ensuring that the corporate safeguarding group carries out its role properly and in accordance with its own terms of reference, which it wasn't doing at the time of our review. And we've made 11 new recommendations that are on pages 6 and 7 of our report. I won't go through each one as part of this, but you can see for yourselves the areas that those recommendations cover. Exhibits 2 and 3 of the report set out whether the council has met the recommendations from those earlier reports. In many cases, the council has not met or has only partially met those recommendations. But the focus now needs to be on taking forward the 11 new recommendations we've made, and we'll be keeping a watching brief on that going forward, and are keen to see how the council is taking this forward and is strengthening its arrangements. So we'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian, Bethan and Non. I'll ask, welcome to Councillor Richard Church, and I'll ask Councillor Church and Nina if they would like to make any response before I open for questions across the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Shall I come in first, and then Nina will follow? Both Nina and I took on our respective roles in corporate safeguarding in July of last year, and probably the first thing we faced on being appointed was this audit review, and it was very clear, I think, to both of us as that audit review was being done that there were issues that we needed to address. And we started work on that in September, which has led to a number of things being taken forward, and has enabled us, I think, to already address some of the recommendations made, particularly, and I think it's just been said by Ian Phillips, in relation to the adoption of a corporate safeguarding policy and the terms of reference for our safeguarding group. I felt it's been my responsibility as the Cabinet lead on corporate safeguarding to keep the issue in high profile across the Council, amongst members of the Council and wider. And I am pleased to see that on training, particularly for members. We've now reached a point where 98% of our councillors have undertaken the training, and the level of training has increased substantially amongst our staff as well. Yesterday, I was pleased to see that a web page was launched on our website, which has completed another of the recommendations made. I think that's probably will do for me, and I'll leave it to Nina to take up any issues and respond to any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Richard. I'll bring in Nina, and I will come to you, Councillor Peat, for questions, but I want to give Nina the chance to speak first. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd just like to thank Non, Bethan and Ian from Audit Wales for their work and findings. I welcome and accept all of the recommendations outlined in their report. When Councillor Richard and I took on the responsibility for corporate safeguarding last summer, as Councillor Richard has said, it was immediately clear that there was work to do and urgent actions to be completed. Therefore, we drafted an action plan and started to implement that plan with immediate effect. And I want to really make it stressed here that that was working corporately across all services. The engagement was from across the council, supported by cabinet and scrutiny, and it's all been very positive. We've been supported by a cross-service working group as well. And my thanks go to everyone who's been involved with this work over recent months. At the time of the publication of the report by Audit Wales in December, we were assured to see that progress had already been made against all the actions and recommendations, and today we have many of the actions complete or in progress. I'd just like to note here all of the actions from the recommendations from Audit Wales will be added to the corporate regulatory tracker, and that means that they're going to be monitored through the quarterly performance monitoring processes and procedures, as well as through our safeguarding channels. The current action plan has been shared with you as part of your supplementary agenda. I would like to say that this is the first step. I acknowledge that there is more to do, but I can give you the assurance that we now have robust governance procedures and processes in place to continue to support the improvement journey. Safeguarding is a priority for Powys County Council, and it is all of our responsibility. Chair, if it's all right, I'd just like to go through and just pull out a few of the highlights from the action plan, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks. Go through the highlights, then I'll bring Councillor Peat in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, corporate safeguarding policy was approved by Cabinet on 13th of December of last year. So this was a key piece of policy that we were missing, and I'm really pleased that we were able to get that in place. We followed Welsh Government guidance, we've taken best practice and learning from other local authorities as well, and that is now in place. Alongside that policy, which is obviously a very significant piece of work, we've also created a one-page summary, which I think is really positive as well. So that it's that snapshot of corporate safeguarding on a page, and that summary guidance was something that was requested from Cabinet. It was their feedback, and I'm very pleased. I think it was a very positive step to take forward. I'd just like to note that the corporate safeguarding policy is held along with all of our other policies on a central repository, and a refresh and review date is included within that repository so that we can ensure that this policy, along with all of our corporate policies, are regularly reviewed and updated. The terms of reference for the Corporate Safeguarding Board were reviewed, refreshed and approved at the Corporate Safeguarding Board on the 5th of December. Again, another key action that we needed to take. Communications around safeguarding is one of the things that we needed to look at and improve. As Councillor Richard has just mentioned, one of the actions was to create safeguarding landing pages on our public website and on our internal intranet. Now, on the action plan, we showed that as a target for completion for March 2023, but I'm really pleased to say that we've actually gone live with those pages yesterday, and we will be having communications and press releases on those early next week. So the promotion on those will be starting shortly. Improve, as I said, in terms of improved communication, one of the suggestions from scrutiny we've had after a really positive session with them, they'd like us to consider having a safeguarding theme per month. So that's something we're going to be taking back from scrutiny to board as a suggestion to look at implementing in the future. Internal audit project work is ongoing at the moment in terms of safer recruitment and DBS, and that started on the 28th of November. And I'll be working with Ian and the team in SWAP to put in place a robust rolling work programme for safeguarding. I think a real key, and thank you to colleagues from across the council for working on this, but is self-evaluation. Safeguarding is going to be incorporated within annual self-evaluation work that is undertaken corporately. And I think this is really positive. It's going to make it a very robust process. And of course, we've already got established reporting mechanisms set up with that. And that will lead into the completion of the annual report. Recommendation 5 within the Audit Wales report notes that there were 2 DBS policies. That has been reviewed, and I can now report that Powys County Council has 1 DBS policy in place. That action has been completed. Recommendation 6 was to produce guidance on the recruitment of volunteers, and I'm pleased to report that a draft corporate volunteering policy is in progress at the moment, and we hope to get that adopted in the next few months. Recommendation 7, an update on that. A new contract management approach is being developed to set out how the council manages its contracts with regards to performance, and that includes ensuring safeguarding practices and controls are in place. Recommendation 8 is around mandatory training. This is a real key area of focus for the board and will remain a priority and an agenda item at every meeting of the Corporate Safeguarding Board moving forward. Member compliance with mandatory safeguarding, just an update for you, is at 99%. And the mandatory training in terms of staff is improving. I think we're now up at top 70s, I think about 78%. So that's an improving picture, but we accept there's more to go, and we expect to see that level of compliance continue to rise over the coming weeks. Recommendation 9, an update. Providers will be expected to provide safeguarding training to employees in accordance with Compass guidelines. The council will be reconfirming this expectation, and it will be monitored through new contract management framework approach that I referenced earlier. So thank you, Chair. That's just a few of the highlights, but there's more detail within the plan that has been provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nina. Much appreciated. I was on mute. I'll bring in Councillor Pete, then Councillor Graham, and then John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Maybe a bit of a redundant comment now to some degree, because I was, again, I suppose, going to ask, why is it taken from 2015 to get to where we are now? But I do also note the report's dated November 22, and some actions have been taken since then. So thanks to both Councillor Richard and Nina for the reassurances that they've given that actions are now being taken, and it does appear to have a focus and a priority to get these addressed. The only sort of remaining point I had was in relation to the comment in the report about the council still does not have proper control of its corporate safeguarding arrangements, which exposes us to risk. I wondered if either sort of Nina or Councillor Richard had any comment on what degree of control they feel we now have, bearing in mind the actions they've taken, and how they would assess the risk now.
Thank you, Councillor Pete. Nina?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Peets. I think that's a really good challenge. I feel very confident that the work that we've undertaken through the autumn around safeguarding now puts us in a much better position than where we were previously. So I'm quite assured that we have robust processes and procedures in place now, and really importantly, I think that they can be sustained in the future. So, you know, the recommendations from the Audit Wales report are going to be going on to the corporate regulatory tracker, so they'll be monitored through the quarterly performance monitoring assurance processes. So for a start, I think that's really positive, and make sure that, you know, corporate oversight is not lost on these actions moving forward. The policy is on the central repository for all corporate policies, which is new, and again I think is a really positive step forward for the council. So the review date, etc., is all will have automatic reminders. Of course, we may choose to review policies before that date, but I think that's a positive step forward as well. So in response, Councillor Pete, I think we're in a lot better position and can be assured that we have robust procedures and processes in place. There is more work to do though, and you know, we will be taking this action plan to the board at our next meeting in early March for, you know, really expect a lot of challenge and constructive challenge about what else we can be doing and should be doing. And of course we will be going to scrutiny, health and care scrutiny as well, going through this action plan in detail and getting their feedback as well. And also we will be getting their feedback on future work programmes for the board as well. It's really important that we have that loop, and of course Cabinet as well. So I think, you know, we've done a lot of work over the autumn, and we've got a lot of things in place already, but there is more work to do, and you know, I'm assured and confident that we will continue to drive this improvement forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that update and those reassurances, Nina, and to say thanks again for all the hard work that you're putting into to getting these points addressed. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Pete. Very helpful. Thanks, Nina. Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And first, I'd like to share those comments and say a big thank you to Nina in particular, and to Councillor Richard, who seems to have inherited this situation. It is very concerning, as I'm sure we all agree here. A fact judged, I would think, by the very negative press coverage that Powys Council has received over this in the last few days. My question is, I am not aware, although I may well have missed it, that this matter has been flagged up on our risk register over the last 2 to 3 years. I wonder, can someone confirm or otherwise that is or is not the case? And if it is not the case, who is responsible really, and why wasn't this matter brought to our attention a lot earlier than this? You know, we're talking about 2014-15 when this report was initially brought to our attention, and it is really concerning that it's taken this time to get this far. I'm very appreciative of the work that's happened since November, but we need to understand, I think, as a committee, how it's been allowed to get to where it is.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. Is any of the officers in a position to? Nina.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Graham. And I think that's a really important challenge back to us as a council. I'm sorry that, you know, that things weren't put in place as quickly as they were. I can't comment as to why that was, but what I can say is that that's one of these key reasons that why the actions that we've put in place around the corporate regulatory tracker is to ensure that that doesn't happen again. And the same with the central repository of the policies, etc. So it's important that we acknowledge that things did not happen as they should have, but what's key here is what we've put in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So thank you very much for the comments and the challenges. I accept those, and I just wanted to provide that assurance to you that we've put in place steps now to make sure that that doesn't happen moving forward.
Thank you very much, Nina. Thank you very much, Councillor Graham, for your question. And, you know, notwithstanding whatever has happened, it's really important that we look to the future and we have a robust system of governance to support this going forward. So thanks for your assurance on that, Nina. John.
Thank you, Chair. Nina, the your presentation stopped at, I believe, at recommendation 9. I'm interested particularly in recommendation 10, which is the performance monitoring. What form do you think that will take? How regularly do you think this committee will be updated? Because I noticed in recommendation 1, we're pretty central to its oversight.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, was it recommendation 10 or 11 you said you were interested in? Sorry.
10.
Oh,
10.
sorry. Apologies.
It's the performance monitoring side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, performance monitoring, I've already mentioned that obviously we've got the regulatory tracker, so that's going to be overseen quarterly as part of the quarterly performance monitoring arrangements we've already got in place. Then there's also going to be the annual self-evaluation, and that's going to be undertaken by all services across the council, and that's going to be undertaken as part of the annual self-evaluation process that's already in place. Excuse me, I think that the timetable is that work starts at the end of the financial year for the first few months of the next, the next financial year. In terms of reports to yourself, I think that's a really good question, and I'll put that back to you and the chair and the committee. And how often would you like me to come and give updates? I'm quite happy to come at an appropriate time to suit yourselves, really. But I will be doing after each corporate safeguarding board, I will be doing updates for scrutiny and for cabinet. I'm happy to perhaps share all of those with you for information. I think that probably would be a sensible step. But then how often I come to your meetings, I'm happy to kind of be guided by yourselves and have that discussion.
Well, if you gave us those updates, I think the committee could then decide when we do need to see you, because we've got pretty packed agendas anyway.
Absolutely.
We do need these assurances. I don't know if the chair agrees with me.
John, absolutely. I think given the history and picking up Councillor Graham's points about the history, I think I'm clear that we need to support officers and the authority. As a committee, we need to support officers and the authority move forward. But I would like to see the governance strengthened so that Governance and Audit Committee can fulfil a role in being assured that the governance that Nina has described, that we are assured that governance is maturing and in place, and that there won't be any more slip-ups. So I think seeing the updates, but perhaps once a year following Cabinet's receipt of the annual report, it would be helpful if we could receive the annual report, not to scrutinise it because it will have been to Cabinet, but to be assured, and for the officers, senior officers, to demonstrate that the governance arrangements that they've described today are in fact in place, so that we can seek that assurance on behalf of the council and the communities across Powys. So I hope that we could contribute to the improved guidance and governance. Councillor Chris.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank Nina and her team for the responses that she's given. I think it's been very comprehensive, and a number of my questions that I did have reading the report have been addressed, so that's helpful in that situation. My first question, though, is in relation to the recommendations that were made in 2014-15. Was there any timeframes put on those recommendations for delivery by Audit Wales, or do you just leave it blank? Because in the report that we have now, you put the 11 recommendations in there, and looking through, I can't see any timeframes on those, unless I'm missing something. So usually if you put a time frame on, that's the delivery, and then you can hold people to account more as a part of that. So that's number one. And then in relation to mandatory training, I'm glad that that's improving on there, because that's always on the. But in relation to the recommendations, have we identified, particularly from the service side, of any resources that are then going to be required in order to deliver some of those recommendations, and have we highlighted those so that we get a handle that the investment going in will then have a benefit? Because if we track then around performance management on around the numbers of incidents that have occurred around safeguarding, we should be able to cost that. And if we've then put more training in place, and that's reducing the number of incidents, we then have a tally up of potentially we've spent this in order to be able to train our staff, but this is the benefit it's bringing back to the organisation, because we're not having to do those safeguarding investigations and incident management, and putting obviously individuals under distress.
Thanks, Councillor Chris. Nina.
Thank you, Councillor Chris, for the questions. I can see Non has put her hand up, so I assume Non is going to come in about the timescales question. So she's nodding. Is it okay, Chair, if I just let Non come in, and then happy to respond to the rest?
Yes, yes, of course, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Nina, and thank you, Chair. In terms of timescales, that's for you as a council to set. The language should tell you everything in terms of concerns and urgent. It is for you as part of your response to any of our reports to set your timescales. Very rarely do we do so. Because obviously we are reporting on a specific issue, that needs to be then considered as part of the council's ongoing response to it, and how it fits with other things that it's already doing, or not, as the case may be, so that you are building it into other things that are going on also, so that it's not just seen as you responding to just a project or a recommendation, because a lot of our recommendations should be integrated into things that you're doing anyway. Therefore, we are not setting, that's one of the reasons we don't set your timescales for you.
I don't disagree with that, but was there any follow-up review between 2015 to 2021, or was that the first review of those recommendations in that period of time?
Sorry, are you asking, is that a question to us or the council?
Yes. No,
okay,
to yourselves.
So to us as auditors, we will have obviously done the 2014 report and also the national 2015 review for yourselves. It's then for councils, as part of your trackers and monitorings, to keep an eye on those, including governance and audit committees, to keep an overview in terms of oversight. So we'd be looking to see how councils take assurance from their own arrangements, which is why then we raise this as a risk to do the follow-up work, because we couldn't see that. So we then put it on our audit plan for 2021 originally, and then for the subsequent year, given the pandemic pressures. So it arose from our assurance and risk work ongoing, and that's why we put it on our audit plan going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Chris. Thanks, Non. Nina, any final comments?
Yeah, no, thank you. In terms of safeguarding resources, Councillor Chris, you mentioned then, conversations are actually ongoing at the moment about allocating a resource to supporting safeguarding moving forward. So just want to say that that's a positive kind of development, and that will be, once we've finalised any arrangements, I'll be able to report those back in due course. Sorry, I've just noted you asked a question about mandatory training as well, but I missed it. I really apologise, Councillor Chris. Can I just ask you to repeat the question, and I'll answer.
Sorry. No, I just made a comment more than anything that mandatory training has improved. However, in relation to if you put training in place, there will be a cost to doing that. But if you demonstrate then that helps to improve the detection or the reduced incidence levels, it can be a demonstration that that has been a good investment to go into your training, because you're actually safeguarding that community going forward.
Yeah, thank you, and apologies, Councillor Chris, I hadn't made that clear on my own notes. But yeah, and that's the responses, that resource that we're looking at the moment to support that training, but also wider corporate safeguarding work. But I would just say that, you know, we're talking about corporate safeguarding here, and make it very clear that the Wales Audit Office was concentrating that, and not a report looking at any individual services. But yeah, no, thank you for that, and absolutely mandatory training is a priority for us moving forward, and that's why, as I said earlier, it's going to be an item on every agenda that we look at with the Corporate Safeguarding Board. And I know it's something Scrutiny Committee as well are very keen to keep an oversight of as well, so to make sure that we have that ongoing challenge and support in that area. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks everyone for this discussion. It's really, really, really important discussion, and I think as a committee we can draw assurance from Nina and Councillor Richards' comments on the work that has gone in since the audit report, and that continues to go on. And as we said earlier, if our forward work plan could factor in an assurance loop, so that we can take a look just to make sure that everything you've said is happening to Cabinet's satisfaction, and that we're moving forward to protect ourselves and the people who work for us. I'm going to move us on. We are quite behind, but we have been dealing with some extremely important business today. John, very quickly.
Very quickly, yes. We've got regulatory trackers in place now. As far as the Wales audit is concerned, are there any other issues like this which are lurking under the surface which should need our attention?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I think that's the kind of information which will probably come out in our work plans for next year. So if there is anything that we identify through our ongoing assurance and risk assessment work, we'll highlight it as part of that piece of work. So can I come back to you on that, if there's, and sort of highlight any areas?
Yes, please do. I mean, this one fell down the
on.
grating, and I'm very anxious that we don't have anything else doing the same.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Yeah, it's a good point, John, and it picks up comments made earlier by Councillor Graham about how things fall between the cracks. So I think it's important. Can I move Audit Wales colleagues on to item 6.2, which is their Q2 work programme and timetable?
Yeah.
And please.
Oh, sorry, Chair.
Sorry. I was just going to say, just assume that colleagues have read your paper and really focus on items for Powys County Council, but also where we can learn from your work in other authorities.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Chair. So yeah, this is your quarterly update, Q2. I'm afraid it missed the last Governance and Audit Committee, so it is slightly behind. So what I'll do is, although you've got the Q2 paper in front of you, I'll give you the current updates to the specific areas. If I can just pull you down to page 5 of the report, page 145 in your agendas. So you'll see that corporate safeguarding arrangements is mentioned there. That has now obviously passed through clearance processes and has already come to you. The review of planning services is being drafted internally. That won't be long to come over to you either. Assurance and risk assessment is our ongoing piece of work, which happens all throughout the year. There are sort of pieces of work buried within that, which I'll come back to a little bit later on, but generally that's our ongoing engagement, which feeds into some of the risks which were mentioned earlier on, which will inform our work programme for the year after. We have our thematic review on unscheduled care, which is taking place all over Wales. We are still in the field work for that now, but coming towards the sort of end of that piece of field work. And the thematic review on digital, you've already had the project brief and we've already started engaging with the local authority on that. And the scrutiny follow-up, which was planned for this year, which is a sort of follow-up from the original follow-up. We are going to continue with that, but it might be incorporated in a wider corporate governance piece of work around that. I won't go through in detail, but there are some really interesting reports towards the end of this paper around the national work which has been undertaken. But I will pass you over now to my colleague David to go through the finance part of the update, if I may.
Thanks very much, Beth, and you're welcome, David. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, there's been a few updates to the financial audit work. The accounts are shown on your report as being in progress. Obviously, you received them and approved them in your last meeting. The deadline shown as November on the report, but the Welsh Government moved that deadline to January because of the late guidance received from SIPFA, changing the requirements for infrastructure assets, which obviously affected everybody, so it was delayed, so all the audits really. Similarly, the pension fund, that was being completed and has been approved on the 1st of December. And then the third thing on there on the report is grants work, and as a result of the sort of delays to the accounts, the grants work has started later. We've been in discussions with some of the grant giving bodies to discuss deadlines and the impact, and so some of those deadlines have been moved. So that work is very much ongoing still, and will probably run for a few weeks yet. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Do colleagues have any questions for Non, Bethan, or David? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Audit Wales colleagues, for your input today and your attendance. You're obviously welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, should you wish. I'll move us on to agenda item 7, with sincere apologies to colleagues Gwilym Davies for the delay in arriving at this item, and to Councillor Berryman as well. Sincere apologies. We've kind of run a wee bit ragged with our timekeeping, but I'm sure Councillor Berryman, you've been here for a wee while, so you'll understand why we are running a wee bit late. But if I can pass over to Councillor Berryman and to Gwilym to introduce us to their presentation on the strategic asset review.
Yes, thank you. This morning I'm just really going to hand over to Gwilym and to be available as necessary to help support him and to answer any questions rather than to take more of your time in introducing it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome. Gwilym, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to try to share my screen. I don't know whether you can see that.
Yeah,
No.
we can see it. Yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, that's great. Okay, the council has extensive assets, 639 separately listed land and building assets. This is constantly changing, and this is a snapshot. So, you know, we are constantly leasing new property or disposing of property. So this is a snapshot from last year. But it just gives an indication of the scale of assets that the Powys County Council has. Last year, in October, Cabinet approved an asset management strategy, which was something that was much needed for the council to provide structure for the strategic property team as well as the council. It sets out the framework within which the council assets will be appraised, managed and released, ensuring that they contribute and deliver the council's objectives, with the aim very much being the right asset in the right place at the right time for the right purpose. So how do we accomplish this? These are some of the the bullet points contained within the assessment, and it's very much providing timely reviews of asset condition, user reviews, and also the financial aspect to meet our current and future needs, especially in line with the Welsh Government's wellbeing objectives and the longer term reviews of the properties. Deliver value for money, not only for ourselves, but for our service users and tenants. So value for money is important and needs to be a key consideration. Maximising our financial return, but while still being fair and socially responsible landlord. Supporting our services, but more importantly, in my opinion, supporting the people who are accessing our services. Providing assets that are in sound condition and fit for purpose and compliant with legislation. That's generally health and safety legislation when I refer to that. Promoting collaboration and community assets with mutually benefit, being an open authority, being proactive in adapting our assets to take into account the climate and biodiversity emergencies being declared by the council. Using our assets creatively to hopefully in line with best practice, so that we deliver our corporate objectives. Helping support our communities with their resilience and sustainability. Promoting innovation, embracing technology. I think this is the exciting field for the council going forward. And then also embracing corporate landlords as we shift from individual service areas managing their assets to corporately being managed by strategic property. So I now go on to the action plans. What are we actually going to do as part of this strategy? The first one, and I think this is a vital step for the authority, a huge step forward, is to undertake conditions assessments and surveys. We have to properly understand the condition of our assets. And if we don't know what the condition is, how can we effectively utilise them and plan for the future? This information will result in us being able to make timely and, more important, and informed decisions. So the key performance indicators, and these will be monitored via the integrated business plans, as well as the quarterly performance reviews for portfolio holders, is listed there, and that's the percentage of assets with condition assessments or condition surveys within the last 5 years. So this financial year, our target is 20%, and we are on target to hit that 20% with asset reviews. We're actually currently on target for 23%. But we are very confident that we'll hit the 20% at least this year. Then next year, there's a big jump to 50%. But we believe that with the Asset Collaboration Programme Wales Phase 3 funding, which is contributing to undertaking building and energy assessment surveys, as well as compensation for work that we're undertaking as a part of the Levelling Up funds, we can actually put more resource into that condition assessments to ensure that we are on target, if not exceeding the target specified here. And the importance of the conditions assessments is looking at to establish the opportunities. What are the opportunities for example, energy efficiency? If we got that information, we can make better decisions and also take advantage of funding opportunities coming up. Health and safety actions. We've already had experiences when we've undertaken these surveys of identifying assets that are unsafe. We've been able to ensure that it's appropriate actions taken to safeguard users of that asset, and also then plan for the future. For example, in this one instance, for its demolition. The next one is user reviews and action plans. Now, this is something that in the past, the property service would be walking around buildings and talking to people, but it's very much an informal kind of process that took place. And with the changing environment that we're working in, we need something a bit more formal. So we got appropriate audit trail and have secure appropriate feedback from the service areas in this new world. So this is a vital one for securing information so that we understand how our premises are working for people, and to ensure that we take feedback about how we can improve our assets to hopefully ensure better opportunities for all. And the performance target is for next year to 100% of the service areas and tenants to have annual asset review, and where appropriate for action points to be provided. We've currently got a corporate asset policy, and as part of this strategy, we are looking to review that corporate asset policy to make sure that it is fit for purpose. The strategy that is in front of you now, that's a high level document. It tended to provide guidance for decision makers. What we are looking for within the asset management policy is to have the processes to be followed in particular circumstances to be outlined, so that there's consistency in approach. So this could relate to community asset transfers of assets to registered social landlords, what happens with surplus properties, disposals, leases, and so on, even going down to things such as what do we do with our allotments, what the processes take place, so that is all very transparent and in one place. And this asset management policy is on the forward work programme, and we are looking to adopt it in end of March this year. And the last action plan from the strategy that's been adopted is for the asset reviews. Now, this strategy requires each asset, or where appropriate, group of assets to have a review by strategic property every 5 years. This is something new, and it's not something that we have undertaken formally. This review will use the matrix methodology, where competing pressures and interests will be tested in a clear and consistent way. And hopefully it'll enable timely and informed decisions or recommendations to be made to relevant portfolio holders. Now, I've listed some of the key considerations there, such as the corporate plan, the asset assessments that have been undertaken, that needs to feed into the reviews, compliance with legislation. We need to ensure that we have a compliant assets, the economy, environmental impacts, community social value, service area requirements, technology, financial health, medium-term financial strategy, equalities, health and well-being, and partnership working, taking advantage of our public sector partners in ensuring that our assets are looked at as one. And the performance indicators for this one is by the end of next financial year for 25% of our assets to have been had a review, and then the following year after that 50%. But it has to take into account if you got any leases or properties with break clauses or lease terms coming to an end, we need to make sure that we are reviewing them at least 18 months before that, so we can undertake appropriate or make informed decisions about how we pursue those assets. That's everything from me, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll open for questions, and I can see that Councillor William already has his hand up. So Councillor William, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Gwilym for speaking to this presentation. It's really informative, and I think a step change in terms of the pace that you and colleagues such as Neil Clutton, sort of with the political engagement and support of Councillor Jake and others, is really welcome. And I've had some engagement in my own area over specific assets. Some of them have just become available as such, and subject to review. Others have been sort of languishing for years and years and years, to the detriment of our reputation and to the kind of dereliction of the assets. And I think this is really helpful. Just a couple of quick questions from me, conscious of time. Firstly, what proportion of the assets are subject to some sort of designation on a heritage basis, either individually as grade 1, grade 2, whatever, or within a conservation area? And secondly, just to seek reassurance that local members and local town community councils will be kept in the loop the appropriate extent about the management of these assets, because I think it's really important that we don't regard ourselves as an authority as the owner, but that they are assets, they're publicly owned assets in our custodianship and in our stewardship, and that we sort of let that inform the way we go forward. And that seems to me to be sort of hardwired into this new approach. And so thanks again. My own experience recently has been particularly positive, and I hope that others will be as well. But thanks for the work that you're doing. Look forward to your responses either now or afterwards if they're a bit too detailed just for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor William. Gwilym, do you want to give some answers now? And I can see that Councillor Jake would like to come in too.
I can, in relation to the first question, in relation to percentage of our assets that are listed or within conservation areas, unfortunately, I don't have that information to hand. We do have a number of our assets that are listed, and we need to make sure that we take that into consideration when making decisions. You know, we are custodians, the council's custodians of those buildings. And we are in dialogue with Welsh Government about that requirement, as well as with CADU, to ensure that we are looking after those assets appropriately, or if we can't, then we have to make appropriate decisions to make sure that we do. In relation to the second one, we are in dialogue with local councillors such as yourselves in relation to the decisions that we make. And we also encourage expressions of interest from all parties, including local councils as well as town councils, and we'll ensure that we assist them in whatever way we can.
Thanks very much, Will, and thanks, Councillor William. Councillor Jake, did you want to come in response at this point?
Yes, just very briefly. I mean, there are a lot of constraints, and it's not just a matter of listed buildings, conservation areas. We've obviously, as a landowner, got land which is subject to special areas of conservation, the SACs, etc. So we are, like any other landowner, subject to those requirements around phosphates and the rivers, and that would affect what we do. So it's not just a matter of those designations, but it's other land designations as well. And one of the things where this strategy is important is that it sets out very clearly that cost isn't the predetermining factor. It is a factor amongst others on the matrix, and that the status, for instance, of a building being listed or in a conservation area places that additional responsibility on us within the matrix that we will obviously take fully into account. So the matrix which you're using for the first time is a really good basis upon which those decisions can be made. Just briefly in relation to the second point, town and community councils and local members are absolutely key. One of the things I've been doing as a local portfolio holder is trying to get out into communities. I've just sent only this week actually a formal email to consolidate some of the work I've already done with Councillor William Powell and others, visiting them on their patches, and basically what I've said is I'm really happy to talk about any planning or property issue, the present or future, that's niggling, to see what their concerns are, what their aspirations are, etc., and see what we can do about that. And one of the things I've also done is said to members, for instance, around a sale, where we do set out what we're doing around a sale and the target price, for instance, that we would like to achieve. One of the things that local members say very often is, but I think you could do better than that, or that's not very good. I'm saying to them, I will speak to you privately offline around this, not for public discourse, because obviously this is a private financial matter, but I will happily tell you and share with you privately those issues which relate to that property in your area, and several members have taken me up on that, and I think that's an additional thing I do, and I think it's really valuable.
Thank you, Councillor Jake. Chair, unfortunately, my IT is letting me down. I just thank you both for those comments, and also note that we are moving into a period that's evident to me that where there's a more intensive and constructive dialogue with the Brecon Beacons National Park on these matters as well, and I welcome that. Thank you very much. Apologies, Chair, I need to leave now. Otherwise, my computer will do it for me.
Okay, thanks, Councillor William, for your contributions. Gareth and then John.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very interested to see that a fundamental of this review is an acknowledgement by the council that they don't hold these assets for their own sakes, but they are means to ends. And Gwilym outlined assets there to help deliver the council's objectives and provide access to service users. I think that's a fundamental that gives very good underpinnings to the review. But I do get a feeling that this is a bit steady state. One of the big things post-COVID is a huge change in working practices in the council, where people are working from home, only going into the office occasionally. And one of the things I was wondering about, where in this review is there a fundamental look at the need to hold property? You're asking individual services to do their own reviews, but that could be a bit self-fulfilling. And the other question I had was about the council doesn't have to own all the assets in order for the residents to enjoy them. And I just pluck one example I've heard of before is the council is an owner of woodlands. Do these woodlands have to be in the council's ownership for them to contribute to the nature conservation, public enjoyment and what have you?
Thank you, Gareth. Councillor Jake, did you want to comment?
Yes, if I may. Sorry, I don't want to steal all of Gwilym's thunder, but we do commit within this strategy. It's a high-level strategy to look at. We're looking at 25% reviews every year for a period of time, and office accommodation is a really important area for us to have a look at. So we've both got a dialogue with service users to see what their service demands are as we come back from COVID, and actually we have new ways of working policy across the council, which means that in many service areas, working from home 4 days a week works fine, and perhaps they're only visiting. You'll be familiar with terms like hot desking and things. They've been around for a very long period of time. So we are actually carrying out a fundamental review of our office requirements, and indeed those office requirements both of service users, our partners, etc., which will, I'm sure, over the next 12 to 18 months see a change in the amount of accommodation that we hold, and a reformatting of some of the accommodation that we retain to make sure it's fit for purpose for the future, and those new ways of operating, new ways of working, like meetings like this today. We don't need to come together so much. So we are doing that. It's also, there is a recognition we don't necessarily need to own all of the property, so we could release property and have a lease back, sell property and have a lease back arrangement on that, or other ways of working. And in relation to things like woodland, yes, we will eventually get round to looking at all of this. We are looking at our farm estate and how all of our land operates for us. But sometimes actually it's useful to hold land and then to sublet it, etc., to other partners. Other times it's useful to do the reverse of that. So you're right, we do need to keep that fresh and to continually to assess what is going to drive the best outcomes and who's going to be able to deliver the best things on the ground. So thank you for that. We will keep that fresh.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for your questions, Gareth. Thank you very much, Councillor Jake. John, and I'm going to make this the last question in this item. I do apologise, but for all our sakes, I think we need to start to move towards the close. John.
Thank you, Chair. My question really surrounds your comment about the MTFS. In the MTFS, the capital receipts elements has historically been what I've described repeatedly as unambitious at around 2 million. I note in the current MTFS, they've increased now to some 4 million. I still think this is unambitious, and I would like to see within this programme a more rigorous or vigorous approach to disposals to actually support our capital programme going forward.
I think, John, that point is noted. It is something that we are discussing at both Cabinet and Executive Management team. You have seen a slight increase in that. We're very aware of that. But one thing we do have to be aware of, whilst we might be able to reduce our prudential borrowing by contributing assets, the sale of assets also potentially reduces the amount of revenue that we have available. So it is a double-edged sword: capital receipt, loss of revenue, lower revenue because of lower borrowing, and it is a complex equation that we look at very carefully. And you only sell the silver once, so we have to make sure that our assets do work for us both in the short term and the long term. But I think it's a point well noted, and one that we do are constantly discussing, and what is the appropriate level, because we've got to make sure that we continue to operate in the long term as a council, and therefore a dash for cash now would mean that we might be vulnerable in the long term, prejudice our long-term sustainability. So it is a balance, but your point is well taken.
Thank you very much for that. I've been making this point though now since I've been on the council now for around over 12 years, and it's good to see that. Good to hear that we're actually now going to embark on a programme and looking at the disposals in a positive fashion rather than an emotional one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for your question, and thanks for your attendance and contributions, Councillor Jake and Gwilym. Thank you very much for that. It was really, really insightful presentation. We really did appreciate it. I'm going to move us on, colleagues, to agenda item 8, which is our work programme. A couple of items have already come up today on work programme. Debt policy to be added to March meeting if we can make it, and also our role in assurance around corporate safeguarding to be an annual item on our work plan. On the work plan also, our self-assessment date, when I think we were going to try for the 3rd of March face-to-face meeting in County Hall. At the moment, yes, on the work plan in the pack, it just says March.
Ah, yes, it is. It is the 3rd we're working to, Chair.
Yeah, we're working to face-to-face Friday, the 3rd of March for our self-assessment, and then our meeting, another meeting in March, I think, when we're now looking at the back end of March.
We are at the moment, Chair, yes.
Yeah. So if we could have those dates confirmed ASAP. I know it's a real juggling act, Gwen, but if we could have self-assessment confirmed face-to-face in County Hall, and then another meeting at the back end of March. And I think we already know that meeting is going to be more than these risk deep dives, don't we?
That's right. I think we've got 3 or 4 items on there.
3 or 4 other items on there.
The debts one.
Yeah, and when I know, and again, I know the team is under pressure, but if we could have the minutes from the 20th of January and today's minutes at that March meeting, it would be very helpful. I recognise that I've just kind of hogged this item. If anyone has any other comments on the work plan, could we have them now quickly? Otherwise, if you would send any more detailed comments to Win in correspondence, please, just to save a bit of time now. But I can see that John's hand is up and Councillor Peat's hand is up. John, you're on. Yeah. Oh, so John's away. Legacy hand. Councillor Peat.
Hopefully just a very quick point, Chair, was when I look at the risk deep dive, say on the 5th of May there, does that mean we're actually doing the deep dive on that day? Does that mean there's a report coming in that day? Or I wasn't quite sure what that meant.
That means that the team responsible for that business area will come and they will give us a paper and a presentation, which really digs right into the risks in that business area. And then we'll have the opportunity to dialogue and discuss it with them.
Yep, thank you very much.
Is that okay?
Yep, that's grand, thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Peat, for your question. It is a point worth clarifying. I will move us on. Just if you've got any further comments on the forward work plan, please send them directly to Win and copy me in if you would. I'll move us on to item 9, which is an exempt item. So we are required to consider passing the resolution that is in the paperwork. When do I need to read it out?
No, Chair, if members will just indicate that they approve it, and then just give me a second, because I'll then have to exclude the public.
Yes, okay. So we are passing a resolution on an exempt item. Are members content to pass the resolution on the exempt item? Can we please have a show of hands? Thank you very much. When members have passed the resolution on the exempt item.